A young man and a young woman were sitting on a bench near the bus station, trying not to look at each other. Without looking up, she said that they had to part ways. The guy took her hand in despair and asked her if they hadn't been through so much together lately. And now that the exams are over, they should be together. He heard a firm no in response. It would be better for both of them. All these difficulties were only her fault. Let them each go their own way. Min Seo was furious. How could Jae-ha just leave him like that? Doesn't she understand why he did everything he did? His beloved's words, that she understood him, and that he needed more time, made him turn away from her. The girl got up from the bench and jumped into the open door of the bus that had just pulled up, saying goodbye and that she believed in him. The young man jumped up and ran after his beloved, unable to hold back the bitter tears that came to his eyes. He shouted her name in desperation as the bus drove away. Confused and upset, Min Seo stood on the porch of the bus station with his hand over his eyes. How could he have known at the time that they would never be able to see each other again? Then he would never have let his beloved go so far away. When Min Seo finally woke up a few days later in his home, he saw the mess that had been created around him. At first, the guy couldn't even understand what the number was, and with a trembling hand, he brought his cell phone to his side to find out. Sitting in bed, he realized how tired he had become over the past few days and wondered what new things he could do to change his life. Amidst the commotion in the room, the young man finally got out of bed and sat down at the table, turning on his laptop. Jae-ha's words that they had to break up were still echoing in his head. The moment he saw his beloved for the last time stood before his eyes, and the words that she believed in him were like a painful thud in his temples. In desperation, the young man hit the table and threw the things on it onto the floor. A photo of him and Jae-ha smiling and happy together fell to the floor. Looking at a similar photo on his cell phone, the boy recalled the days when he graduated from college 2 years ago. After graduating from the institute, he tried to overcome a great sense of insecurity. To do this, he bragged about his ambitious plans to others, boastfully told everyone that all he had to do was pass the civil service exam, although this was not his dream job. He had no inspiration for studying and felt helpless every time he tried to read the books necessary for his future profession. It seemed that his beloved had never stopped believing in Min Seo, although now he was sure that she was ashamed of him at the time. But the young man also had something that made him spend a lot of time at his laptop, which was his true passion. He found an exciting computer game with a rather attractive main character. At first, he resisted, telling himself that it was a typical story in which a girl becomes a princess by marrying a prince, that it was just making money off of children's fantasies. The young man desperately realized that he had important things to do and studies to attend to, but he could not give up and stop this game. And now he realized that playing the game back then made him feel relieved and happy. Finally, Min Seo realized and admitted to himself that he had a lot of fun playing princesses, no matter how strange or pathetic it looked from the outside. And now he has decided to buy this game, even without sparing $2,000 to buy it. With tension and apprehension, he waited for the desired game to load. And now, squinting from the sun, he found himself on a green lawn under a tall green tree. The player heard a pleasant, girlish voice. The girl was addressing someone named Leo. When her hand touched his shoulder, he realized that the stranger was talking to him. He turned around, still not realizing why the beautiful woman was calling him Leo. Looking at his puzzled look, the beauty asked what was wrong with him. A surprised Min Seo did not understand who this stranger was, but he had the feeling that he had known her for a long time. The words seemed to come out of nowhere. Helena's education began. The player asked the upset girl if her name was really Helena, while he was frantically trying to realize whether he was actually in the game. The beauty looked him straight in the eye. "Your achievement is your first meeting with Helena," the voice said. "Helena is very attached to Leo." The player reflected, looking at himself in the mirror, and asked himself if Leo was really him now. He tried to realize that he was really in this mysterious game. Again, he heard a gentle girl's voice, calling him to pick mountain berries. His new friend almost forced him to go with her with a smile. He realized that Leo and Helena had been friends since childhood, and he felt that he remembered all the time he had spent with this beautiful woman. She squatted down by a bush with red berries and looked at them. She noticed that they were the same berries the teacher had told them about. Thanks to communication with his new friend, he has learned a lot of useful information over the past few days. This is a town called Deimos in the border area of Haiden in the east of the kingdom. It is a world where any injury is healed by the power of priests, and Helena wants to become one of these priestesses. The girl was surprised why her friend was looking at her so long and thoughtfully without saying anything. But the thought that he was here only to make his new friend a princess kept bothering Min Seo. This is the point of the game, to make the main character become a princess. Turning Helena into a princess is the main goal. The boy thought that to achieve this goal, he first needed to find a prince. Looking at his friend who was picking berries, he wondered how it was possible to do this in a place where there was not even a lord. The young woman stood by the window looking at the gloomy sky. She thought it was going to rain, so she should probably work at home. The parents asked their daughter if she was going to eat with them, but she said she had already eaten and would soon be going to work. Her parents assured her that she didn't have to go to the store and that she shouldn't exert herself too much today. With a smile to her parents, Helena turned around and quickly ran out the door. Looking through the open door of the shop, the girl politely greeted her aunt. Asking her aunt if she had kneaded any dough yet, the girl started working. Her hands were skillfully kneading the fluffy dough, but her mind was far away from the little shop. The girl realized that her friend had always been not very talkative. But now, he doesn't talk to her at all and never smiles. She had the impression that Leo was always thinking about something of his own and looking dreamily into the distance. The girl seemed to freeze at the table with the dough from such sad thoughts. Suddenly, she looked down at her hands, covered in flour. She wanted to remember the last time she and her friend held hands. The young woman tried to remember when they stopped holding hands. She bowed her head down and said to herself that this happened when she told me that she wanted to be a priestess. But priests cannot marry. I remembered that they were much closer to each other in their childhood. Her work for the day was over, and Helena packed her basket to head home. The girl was standing at the door of the shop, deep in thought, when she heard someone say her name. A smiling young man with freckles on his face waved to her, and how he managed to time the moment she was leaving the store every time. Smiling kindly at her, the young man expressed a fervent desire to walk the young woman home. He walked beside her and chatted nonstop, trying to get her attention. But she was deep in her interrupted thoughts again. Her thoughts were that only on weekends she goes to church to become a priestess. The rest of the time, she has to work to survive. In her mind, she addressed the wise and patient god Nameru, asking him if she could actually become his priestess. At first, the girl did not notice that her companion was far behind. Then she turned to him and said that she would go ahead alone. The young man with the freckles remained standing in the middle of the road, upset by this disrespect. The sadness for Leo in their past relationship could be read in the confused look of the grieving Helena. While lying on the bed, Minseo recalled that it had been a month since he had gotten into this game. At first, he hoped that this game was just a dream, and now he has only faint memories of his past love. They are more like a distant echo. Should he return to his past life? Whether it makes sense to return. Why? Unless it's to prepare for another boring exam. The boy's thoughts focused on whether he should stay here or not. But these thoughts were interrupted. Someone knocked decisively and loudly on the door. A man in a dark cloak with a hood stood on the threshold. The stranger silently looked sternly at the confused young man from under his hood. The young man just stood there looking at the stranger. In his mind, he quickly went through the options of who he could be. The stranger took off his hood and was the first to start talking. He asked sternly if the boy was home, to which he heard an uncertain answer that he was. And when the order to follow him was given, Minseo finally realized that it was his real father and followed him. Then he heard the man say strange things about giving the heart and head of the prey to Lord Barbatos. The strange ritual continued, and the man asked to accept the offerings and protect his family. Finally, after thinking about all the facts, the boy realized that his current father was a hunter. Then the father ordered his son to butcher the prey he had brought back from the hunt. The hunter turned to the young man, staring intently into his face with his hard and cold gaze. The young man decided to play the fool, pretending that he had forgotten how to cut the prey because he hadn't done it for a long time. The stern-looking man walked up to the frightened boy, his eyes fixed on him. Minseo shivered, assuming that the hunter had guessed everything. But a moment later, the father backed down and began to give the boy orders in an instructive tone of voice on what to do and how to do it. A hunter was telling his clueless son how to tie a rope around the carcass of an animal he had hunted. The young man followed all the orders, trying not to reveal his clumsiness in this matter. He noticed that even though he was doing this for the first time, his body seemed to remember all the necessary movements. The father watched his son's every move in silence. Suddenly, Helena's voice was heard calling Leo nearby. The boy was happy to see her and asked if something had happened to her. In response to these words, the girl asked if he wanted to go for a walk with her. She smiled sadly at him and suggested that they go mushroom picking together. At that time, my father continued to do his hunting business despite his youth. The girl was waiting tensely for her friend to decide whether he would go for a walk with her. Now they are sitting in silence on the lawn next to each other, and no one starts a conversation. The upset boy feels that he should start the conversation first. His question about what is wrong makes the girl start a dialogue. Her first words make the guy nervous, because she asks if he remembers. A friend reminds him of a story about how a priest cured her seriously ill father 10 years ago, and says that since then, she, like the savior priest, has wanted to devote herself to helping other people. The girl shared with her friend her doubts about whether she would be able to achieve this goal, and she looked him in the eye and said she wanted to live here with him, to be able to walk with him in the forest like that. The young man listened attentively to his friend. He was a little upset by this frank speech, but the next direct question, whether he personally wanted Helena to become a priestess, completely stumped him. The guy was thinking hard, not knowing what to say to his friend who was waiting for an answer. He did not want to lose her in any way, because he had long since realized that he liked Helena, and not just as an old childhood friend. His heart pounded like crazy when the young woman put her frail hand on his arm. They turned to each other and looked into each other's eyes in silence, not saying a word. Then they stood up and walked out of the forest to the town, still holding hands. But when he entered the village and saw a carriage with horses and people standing near it, the young man felt an unexplainable disturbing sensation. Priest Leslie was walking right towards them, joyfully exclaiming that he had finally found Helena, and saying that the will of the god Namer would finally be fulfilled. The The young couple was very surprised and frightened by the priest's passionate speech. Next to the monk, Leslie stood a knight and a priestess of high rank who said she would take the young woman to a monastery. The confused girl mumbled that this was a very joyful event that she had been waiting for a long time, and the boy froze in his tracks in complete despair, not knowing what to say. Helena also froze. She didn't know what to say and just looked at the people around her with wide open eyes, as if waiting for some kind of clue. The priestess continued her speech, saying that the monk had given the girl good recommendations, so right now she could go with them to the monastery. In addition, the woman said that she had personally offered the girl the position of a novice priestess. Helena was excited about the offer, albeit doubtfully. Meanwhile, the young man was trying to organize his thoughts. He had never thought that Helena would leave this town and go away. The boy thought that if there is a monastery, there must be a castle where the king lives. And if there is a king here, he may have a son, a prince. This means that Helena will have the opportunity to meet him. But if my friend goes to school to become a priestess, it will be very difficult for her to meet a prince. But if Helena leaves the town and is not around, could this game end? Will his everyday life suddenly end here in the game? In fact, the guy felt that he did not want to return to his previous hard life outside the game. Now he was trying to understand what his excited friend was chirping to him. He paused for a moment. He looked the girl straight in the eye and asked her if she thought she would be happier if she stayed here. For several long minutes, the girl looked at her friend without saying anything. And then Helena silently gently took her chosen one's hand and squeezed it tightly. The young woman thanked them from the bottom of her heart for their kind words, but said that she wanted to stay at home. This answer surprised everyone because it was a great opportunity to be baptized. The boy began to remember what his friend had told him about this rite of baptism. In order to receive divine power, someone to whom it belongs must pass it on to another person. This is called baptism. When this ritual takes place, more than half of that power is lost. That is why only outstanding students are chosen for this transfer. While the young man was recalling all this, his girlfriend stood next to him, still holding his hand tightly. Leslie told Helena that she was facing an important choice, whether she would be a priestess with divine power or a simple monk without this power. But the monk said that the main thing was that the girl had devoted her heart to God, and he suggested that she think carefully about the offer she had received. A high-ranking priestess told Helena that they were leaving tomorrow morning, and that if she changed her mind, she could still find them before morning. After saying this, the priestess and her attendant walked toward the building. Monk Leslie was still standing on the road looking at the young couple. Leo and his friend remained standing on the road when the monk finally left. The boy bowed his head thoughtfully and continued to be silent, pondering the situation. The girl returned to the young man and said that she would not leave him. She feels good with him, and this is enough to stay together. The boy realized that in the end, he had denied his friend her desired dream only because he wanted to live avoiding his old problems. As he grabbed the young woman in his arms, he was still thinking that his selfishness had destroyed the dream of a person close to him. Still holding the girl in his arms, he whispered to her that she would be happy with him until the end of her life. Helena quietly told him that she would definitely be happy to be with him. The guy vowed to himself that he would do everything possible to ensure that his beloved never regretted the decision he had made. The young lovers stood there for a long time, unwilling to let go of each other's embrace. Finally, a long time had passed, and the boy had to return to his home. Upon entering the room, he saw his father sitting at the table with a glass of beer in his hand. The young man immediately decided to announce that he wanted to get married at the end of the fall harvest, and now he wondered why his father didn't say anything to him. Of course, his father was always silent, but the boy hoped to hear something when he told him about his intention to get married. Putting a glass of beer on the table, the man silently walked away to a shelf on the other side of the room. A few minutes later, the father put a small fur bag, tied with a rope, on the table in front of his son. Sitting back down at the table next to his beer glass, he explained that the money in the bag was money he had saved from selling jerky and the skin of animals he had hunted. The man went on to say that his son should use the money to prepare for his wedding. Leo sat smiling because he was very happy that his father gave his consent to his marriage. But the stern man showed no emotion. He sat silently at the table and finished his beer. The young man's heart was filled with great gratitude to his father for his unexpected act and support. The time came, and a big bell on the bell tower announced to the locals that a wedding would take place in the church. Many guests gathered in the great hall of the church. Leo was standing in the hall, waiting for his beautiful bride. There was a festive bustle all around. Everything was decorated with colorful flowers for the holiday. And finally, a beautiful bride appeared with a huge bouquet of beautiful flowers in her hands. The boy with the freckles who had once courted Helena entered the hall with everyone else. He remained standing by the door, looking at the bride with a gloomy look. When the newlyweds were almost at the altar, Monk Leslie approached them. The monk said he had something to give Helena. She saw that he was holding a theological book. Handing the girl the book, the monk said that may God be with her always. The groom's face became sad, and it was clear that he was thinking about something. Helena was upset, and while thanking Leslie for the gift, she blinked away the tears that rolled down her face. And now the groom extended his hand to her, as if inviting her to cast aside her doubts and make a final decision. The priest gave a short speech and blessed the marriage of the young couple. The guests clapped their hands and congratulated the newlyweds on the birth of their family. Helena turned to her lover with a joyful smile and wanted to squeeze him in her arms and tell him how much she loved him. The happy young man was smiling sincerely and wanted to say that he also loved his woman very much. But an ominous voice sounded in his head. It said that it welcomed the player. Helena got married. At that very moment, everything around him changed. Minseo stood in the empty hall, desperately calling out Helena's name into the void. Her name seemed to melt on his lips, and the whole world he had been living in for the last few years disappeared without a trace. The image of the bride still stood before the eyes of the shocked boy when the ruthless voice said that it thanked him for playing the game of raising Helena. The voice said that Helena's last profession was as a hunter, and her husband was Leo. Leo's last profession was hunter, and his wife was Helena. The voice summarized the game. The world existed in the town of Demos. The point of the story is the end of a childhood friendship. The confused guy was still standing and shouting that he did not understand what had happened, but the only response was silence. He repeated and repeated that he was the real Leo. It was as if he did not understand who had so cruelly interfered with his new and beautiful life. The young man continued to shout the name of his beloved Helena into the silent space, but silence reigned around him. Minso found himself in complete darkness. It seemed to him that the world around him did not exist at all, neither the real world nor the world of the game. Hundreds of questions were running through his head that he still had no answers to. Suddenly, he remembered his past, and somewhere in his subconscious, the forgotten name Jae-ha popped up. Her figure seemed to flash before his eyes, and the young man was glad to see that he remembered his Jae-ha, at least a little. But at that very moment, the beautiful face of his beloved Helena appeared in his memory. Through the tears coming to his eyes, Minseo firmly decided that he must finally get out of this darkness and this nothingness. He was depressed and sad, but again, a soulless voice spoke to him. It told him that the player had failed to make Helena a princess. As Leo, he became a great hunter and lived happily ever after with his wife, and some of the hunting skills he gained in the game will be available to him in the future. As soon as the words that the player has to start all over again were heard, Minseo felt like he was falling into the abyss. No one heard his scream, and he continued to fly down at breakneck speed. Restart. Finally, the fall stopped. Squinting his eyes, the young man saw mountain peaks in the snow and the bare branches of large trees around him. Looking around in surprise, he realized that he was standing in a snowy clearing, holding a sword in his right hand. The player, like the last time, heard a girl's voice calling out Leo's name and asking if he could hear her. The boy wondered if Leo's name meant that he was back in the old game again. In response, he said Helena's name loudly, and he heard that she had called him first. A stranger stood in front of him and asked him why he was staring at her, and whether he wanted to get a kick. Minseo felt dizzy again. He closed his eyes as hard as he could and put his hand on his head. It felt like his brain was about to explode. Strange sensations, just like the last time, were all over his body. A young woman standing nearby cheerfully addressed him again, calling him Leo. The stern beauty turned to him again loudly, asking why he was daydreaming. It was Helena, but not the Helena he had known before, the one he had grown attached to and loved. Looking around him once again, Minseo realized that this area where he was now was completely unfamiliar to him. The excited boy finally realized that this was a completely new scenario in the game, and again the voice began to tell him the new rules. The rule is that in the game now, he can choose the curator's activity. There are 4 options to choose from: Merchant, Bard A, Retired Knight, Traveling Jester. The starting point of the game will depend on the type of activity you choose. Now he is in the Kingdom of Aston. This is one of the 7 kingdoms on the continent. Feudalism and the tribal system coexist here. The tribal leader and the lord run the castle together. Helena in this scenario is Einar, the daughter of Dehorman, the great warrior. Leo, in this version of Dexter, is the eldest son of a prominent family of knights. The player was thinking that the situation in the game had turned 180 degrees from the previous scenario, in which there was almost nothing outstanding. The only consolation for the young man was that it was the same familiar world and the same continent. On the map, he found the town of Demos. The young man was glad that he was not in a damaged game with a distorted worldview. He read in the book that the capital of the Sacred Kingdom, Jerome, was far away. And again, he heard the loud voice of the girl who was looking for him, calling out Leo's name. The girl walked quickly into the large library hall where Minseo was now. Looking directly at the young man, she asked him in a steely voice why he was here. The young woman was surprised that her friend valued books like a small child. He replied that he was just thinking about going on a trip. Helena was surprised that he was so suddenly interested in traveling. Then the boy decided to share with her his thoughts about what would happen if he did not become a knight, to which his friend told him that this could not happen. She smilingly assured the young man that they would definitely become knights. There was no doubt about it. Now is not the time for thinking, the young woman said firmly, and took his hand and dragged him out of the library. This time, Helena is only interested in becoming a knight. In the snowy courtyard outside their homes, they both took their swords and prepared to train. Again and again, their swords crossed as they struck. The girl was very skillful. Each time, it became more and more difficult for the boy to repel her strong blows. Finally, Leo misplaced his foot so badly that it was struck by the sword. The trainer growled with anger at the unlucky boy who had made a clumsy mistake. The father grabbed the wooden sword used for training and began to beat his unskilled son, even though the latter was persuaded that he would be more skillful next time. The angry man shouted that after death he would not come again. Then he threw away the wooden sword and left. Leo continued to sit in the snow. The boy was upset and offended that he was punished so cruelly when he tried his best. His friend was also upset. She was surprised to hear that he used to do much better because of his peculiarity. She asked him what was wrong with him. The boy tried to repeat the sword exercises he had just performed. His girlfriend tried to support him, saying that he seemed to be doing well. At dinner in the Great Hall, Leo's father sat disgruntled and sad, his arms crossed over his chest. The tribal leader was surprised to hear that the Lord's son was somehow strangely and ineptly wielding a sword during training. The Lord sadly complained that his son seemed to have forgotten how to use a sword. The tribal leader consoled his friend, saying that at a young age, it was quite normal to want to swing a sword as you wish from time to time. But Leo's father was inconsolable and convinced that it was not just youthful stupidity and that it was much more serious. Helena's father said that he was still scolding the young man. Otherwise, his future son-in-law would lose his temper. Leo almost choked on his last sentence. In addressing the boy, the leader asked him to look for his daughter. The young man stood outside the hall and thought about what he had heard at dinner. A future son-in-law. That is, he would have to become Helena's husband. This time the game asked him to turn Helena, whom he promised to marry, into a princess. Minseo didn't understand whether it was possible to complete the game at all. Does he have to marry Helena again and see the same meaningless end to this game? Whether he could live repeating the same thing every time. The young man told himself that he wanted to return no matter what, because he has Jae-ha. The boy thought he heard a strange voice of his friend, slowly asking what he was doing here. Leo was reluctant to respond to the voice, but continued to think about the situation he had just learned about. No matter how much he thought about his problem, he could see only one way out of it. No matter how sorry he is, he should be rude and tough with the girl and break off the engagement. At the very moment when he had developed a good plan of action, a drunken Helena fell into his arms. He tried to keep her from falling to the floor. He was asked to take his drunken friend to her room. The surprised young man could not believe what had happened. The boy dragged the young woman to the closed door of her room and tried to revive her. His girlfriend hugged him and said that he had been acting very strange lately. She invited him to have another beer and tell her everything. The guy looked at Helena with anger and condemnation. He was uncomfortable with her behavior. He grabbed the drunken woman by the arm and, despite her resistance, dragged her into the room. Then he pushed the girl, who could barely stand on her feet, right into bed with her clothes on. Then he sternly ordered her to go to bed immediately because she had already drunk enough for the day. The young man left and quickly closed the door of the room, leaving his friend to rest and sober up alone. The next morning, a cheerful and smiling Helena ran out of the house despite the freezing weather and falling snow. She cheerfully greeted a bunch of young men who were sitting in the yard and shouted their greetings to her. The boys asked her why she was so calm, even though she was very late today. The girl replied that she could not do anything about it because she had overslept. The young woman squinted her eyes and complained that it was all because of Leo, who was doing things he had never done before. Leo used to never refuse anyone anything. He was always like a kind and boring knight with good manners. The girl continued to gossip, saying that her fiancé was completely different now. His connection to the sword was not what it used to be. In the past, this relationship was stable. Possession of weapons was powerful and had no weaknesses. Suddenly, the figure of Leo appeared around the corner and the girl greeted him with a raised right hand. Her friend was returning from his morning training. Although he was in a good mood, he complained that he thought they would kill him if they hit him again. The girl laughed out loud at this speech, saying that her uncle had beaten the clumsy boy again, and then she added that she liked the current Leo too. This upset and confused the boy a bit. His eyes showed concern. The girl turned to the crowd of guys and said that she and her fiancé were leaving. Taking Leo's hand, the young woman asked him what had happened and what was bothering him. He mentally searched for an answer to the question of whether Helena was not concerned about yesterday's unfortunate incident. The girl smilingly assured her friend not to worry and to follow her. She said she would teach him everything. Walking alongside the girl who chatted non-stop, Minseo doubted whether he could make her love someone else. Once, walking ahead of a small group of hunters, a young man carefully examined the snowy terrain. At first, people noticed the prints on the fresh snow cover and then saw the animal. A huge, wild bear with fierce eyes stood right in front of the crowd of hunters. A few seconds later, the huge predator was lying on the snow in front of the skilled hunters. A pleased Chief DeHorman smiled, saying that he had a wonderful son-in-law. Although Lord Noel is a terrible hunter, his son is a very good hunter. Surprised by Leo's abilities, his fiancé kept asking if Leo had ever hunted before, and why he was so good at it. The young man did not know what to say to this. He thought about the fact that a year had passed since he had wanted to leave Helena. During this time, they grew up. But a few weeks ago, the two of them decided to join a hunting party, led by DeHorman. Thanks to the hunting skill from the previous scenario and the ability gained at the end of the first game, it was not that difficult to join the process. Helena was in a playful mood. She said that now was not the time to be idle. One of the older hunters called out to them to stay close to the others. But the stubborn girl kept walking. The boy had no choice but to follow his friend. He called out to her loudly. The young woman stopped and looked back at him. At the same moment, a snowball made of loose snow hit her right in the face. She screamed in surprise, brushing the snow from her face and hair. Looking at her friend, laughing with satisfaction, she shouted that he was going to be in trouble. A few seconds later, a huge snowball hit the smiling, impudent man right in the middle of his forehead. The first snowball was followed by at least a dozen well-aimed snowballs. Helena was tirelessly firing bullets at the boy quickly and skillfully, shouting that he should try to dodge now. Here he was, dodging snowballs, slipped and fell into a pile of snow. The girl ran up to her opponent laughing. First asked him if he agreed that he had lost the fight, and then reached out to pull him out of the snowbank. For a moment she stood, staring intently into the young man's face. He too froze, staring back at his friend's wide-open eyes. Suddenly, the young woman let go of Leo's hand, which she was helping him to stand up, and the young man fell back into a pile of snow. The girl noticed huge animal prints on the snow cover. The friends went over and looked into the abyss with strange footprints leading down. The prints were shallow. What kind of animal could it be with paws like that? It must be very dangerous. Helena thought there was something down there. The brave girl was determined to go and see what it was. Otherwise, they might have missed an unknown animal. Her companion, on the contrary, believed that it could be very dangerous and that it was better to go back and call other hunters, that they would not miss anything. Finally, the young woman agreed that he was right and that there was nothing wrong with being cautious. And it was a very reasonable reasoning, because the next moment, the young hunters saw a strange creature. This creature that was waiting for them was called a mythical fox. It looks more like a magical animal than an ordinary predator. The good thing is that at the moment of danger, the powerful and experienced warrior Dehorman was by the young couple's side. The leader did not hesitate to rush at the terrible creature, holding his weapon firmly in his hands. The brave warriors of his unit followed him resolutely. The huge beast fiercely resisted his opponents. A few minutes later, the victorious shouts of the brave warriors who had defeated the huge predatory monster sounded. All the warriors were immensely happy about the victory. Leo thought about this moment in the game. Was this case a kind of event? But he did not understand the meaning of such an event. Sitting at a table in the castle hall, the boy was still thinking about the development of the game's plot. His attention was drawn to a piece of paper held by the leader. Leo tensed, sensing the importance of the moment when Dehorman began to deliver his short speech. Lord Noel listened with tension and question in his eyes to what the tribal leader was saying. The speech was not long. Its meaning was that their kingdom, Aston, would launch an offensive on the lands of the neighboring kingdom of Velita. The father explained to his son that the royal family always wanted to have the fertile and rich lands of Velita. The chief said that the Holy Kingdom of Jerome, which also borders Velita, would not participate in the campaign, and that it would be necessary to call up an army from Fort Avril. Noel disagreed with him, and the conversation turned to the protection of the southwestern borders. At the time, Leo was trying to figure out what would happen when this event began. He did not have time to think about what would happen to his fiancée, and suddenly heard the leader say that Helena would be participating in this campaign. Stunned by this unexpected news, the young man sat there without saying a word. Helena just beamed when she heard the news. Of course, she is the daughter of a great warrior, and her help will definitely come in handy in this campaign. The girl was excited, thinking that her military experience would surely be useful on her way to knighthood, and ignored her mother's sad look. Finally, the young woman told her that it was okay, that every soldier had to take part in military campaigns. As the young woman stood hugging her parents, the young man wondered if she would have gone on this hike if a mystical fox had harmed her in the forest. The boy was trying to figure out if there was a variant of the game other than the one where Helena disappears. The young man walked into the room where his father was sitting by the window, slowly turning the pages of a book. The lord looked up from his book and looked at his son, who was standing next to him. After a bit of hesitation, the young man clearly said that he would also go on the campaign with his fiancée because he was going to become a knight. Looking his son straight in the eye, the man said he would not allow this to happen because going on a hike with the skills he had was a direct path to loss. The young man argued in despair that such a campaign does not always mean severe consequences and losses. Noel was furious and yelled that his son was a stupid boy who couldn't talk about what could really happen on a dangerous hike. And if the young man continues to talk all this nonsense, he will cripple him himself. The angry man would not listen to anything and ordered the naughty boy to get out. After kicking his son out of the room, the lord sank into a chair and covered his face with his hands. Leo stood outside the door with a gloomy face and did not understand what to do now and how to deal with Helena. The lord was not joking when he threatened to cripple his descendant, whom he pushed so hard that he flew into the corner of the room and fell to the floor. He was beating the naughty man and shouting that he thought the knight of Castle Avril would not find out about the secretly sent request. The boy did not defend himself and tried to ignore his father's kicks. The young man could not find any other way to solve the problem than to go to the city and find those who were in charge of enrolling him in the army. He stood in a line of young men as young as he was and daring to sign up for the army. Now he has no choice but to wait for the day of the draft. The day before the day of the draft, Leo looked out into the yard and saw Helena practicing various sword exercises. He called out to her and offered her a training match. Clutching his wooden training sword tightly in his hands, the young man prepared for the test. Smiling, the girl put aside the real sword she had been practicing with and slowly picked up a wooden sword for training. She said that her opponent should be very careful now because her body is in perfect condition for the competition. This speech did not affect Leo's determination to get on the hurts immediately. The training sword was clutched tightly in his palms, and he was determined to win the competition. The girl stood opposite him, also confidently holding her weapon in her hands. The warning and the stern look of her friend were clearly not enough to frighten the enemy. The chief's daughter was on the alert when the enemy began his attack. Looking into his face, she smiled, holding back a punch. And the moment the enemy recovered, she struck back. The surprised opposition could barely keep their feet from such a powerful counteroffensive. And the warrior had already raised her training sword again, preparing to strike again. It took a lot of effort for the boy to hold back such a powerful onslaught. The training continued, and it seemed that the skilled warrior was not even a little tired. She not only skillfully deflected the enemy's attacks, but also very deftly dodged some of them. Again and again, its opponent experienced new combat techniques. But finally, Leo very skillfully and confidently restrained the powerful blow that his friend had thrown. The young woman smiled at him and asked him encouragingly if he had actually gotten better with the weapon. Smiling, the boy replied that of course he hadn't been idle all this time. After a short rest, and without wasting much time, both opponents began to fight again. The young man tried to attack continuously, making various sword strikes and looking for a weak spot in the opponent's defense. The sounds of the wooden swords hitting each other echoed loudly around, announcing that the competition was still going on. Finally, Helena had a good chance to trip up her opponent. The boy crashed to the ground with a bang and realized that this time he had lost. The victorious woman held her sword to his throat and said that his strange sword skills were far from perfect. The young woman smiled victoriously at her defeated opponent, who could not believe that it was over so quickly, and taught him that he needed to train hard. The young man, who had deftly jumped to his feet, picked up his girlfriend and threw her down. Furious with rage at such a treacherous maneuver, the young woman cursed and fought back. But when I heard from the guy that he understood everything perfectly, I froze in amazement, looking at him. Looking into the sad and confused eyes of her friend, she finally realized why he had done this. She smiled gently at her friend, and in her eyes flickered bright lights he had never seen before. Helena's hand gently touched his face, and she assured him that he would definitely return from the trip safe and sound. Hugging him by the neck, she told him that he shouldn't be idle and devote all his time to training. And finally, the moment came when their lips merged in an amazing kiss. It seemed to the lovers that time had stopped and the whole world had ceased to exist. When Leo woke up the next day in his bed, he couldn't figure out whether he had dreamed it all. He recalled all the details of the previous evening when he said Helena's name. When he realized that the girl was not with him, he ran out of his room, half-dressed, shouting her name loudly. In the hall, Dehorman and Helena were sitting at the breakfast table, and Helena immediately blushed and dropped the apple she was eating on the floor. The boy could not move without knowing what he should say. The silence at the table was suddenly interrupted by the loud laughter of the tribal leader. The father realized everything and continued to laugh incessantly at the upset and embarrassed couple. The girl continued to sit at the table in embarrassment and lowered her head so that it was not obvious how upset she was. After laughing to his heart's content, the leader invited his future son-in-law to join him for breakfast. A large crowd of those who were going on a hike and those who were seeing them off had already gathered at the main gate of the castle. Helena's mother hugged her daughter and begged her to take care of herself. When saying goodbye, the young soldier also told her father to take care of himself until she returned. The two rulers of the castle stood side by side as they saw off their troops on a long march. Finally, the moment came when it was time for Leo to say goodbye to his fiancée. The young man looked intensely at his beloved's face as if he wanted to memorize all her features for the rest of his life. The young woman looked back at her lover and fought back the tears that were about to well up in her eyes. Finally, she smiled through the force and said that she would definitely come back to him. He squeezed his beloved in his arms with all his might and begged her to come back alive and unharmed. The girl confidently replied that she would definitely become a knight when she returned from the campaign. The bugles blasted and the drums thundered, announcing that the march had already begun. Standing a little further away from the crowd of people who were seeing him off, Leo tried to appear calm and not show his feelings. The soldiers from the detachment went out of the gate one by one, leaving the square in front of the castle. Left alone, Leo spent all his time training with his sword and doing various physical exercises. He hoped that when he learned to use the sword well, his father would allow him to join the squad and fight side by side with his beloved. Hoping for this, he had little doubt that it would happen. But soon the news came that Helena would never return. Helena, the warrior whom he had been waiting for to return from the campaign, is no longer there. Once again, the ruthless voice told him that it was thanking him for playing the game of raising Helena. The voice said that Einar Helena's last profession was a warrior of the Einar tribe and was single. Dexter Leo's last profession was knight, and he was single. The voice summarized the game. The end of the character's interaction is a worthy end to life. Just like the last time, Mincio asked himself again whether it all made sense. The young man was in complete despair because his beloved left life as a true warrior and he could not even be with her. After the end of this story, Leo, who was forgotten in this world, also soon passed away. You failed to make Helena a princess, the voice impartially summarized. When you became a knight, you spent your life defending your castle and thus gained the ability to wield a sword and also inherited a sword. Restart. Last time he learned hunting skills. Now he's got a sword. Maybe in the future he'll become so strong that he can overcome all obstacles, Minseo thought. And once again, the boy realized that the game had thrown him into a new and unfamiliar place. Looking around, Minseo realized that he was sitting on dirty, cracked slabs against the wall of an unknown building. He heard a quiet girl's voice calling out to his brother and was horrified to see the girl's appearance. Confused, he did not know what to say to the blonde woman who sat down on the stove next to him and quietly said that she was hungry. The young man was thinking that if we compare this character Leo with the previous ones, something seems wrong with him, and that this girl next to him could be Helena. What's wrong with the current Helena, and why this Leo left her in such a miserable state? The unclean woman in tattered clothes closed her eyes and whispered to give her a drink. It turns out that this time they are brother and sister, the boy thought, but she looks just awful. If nothing is done right now, her soul may leave her body. The young man looked out from behind the corner where they were sitting and saw a square with many people in front of him. The player realized that in this scenario, he and his sister are beggars. The young man silently looked around the busy street at the passers-by in the food shop in front of him. When he saw the food on the counter, he felt his stomach twist with hunger. The owner of this small shop was very unhappy with the boy's appearance. A stern man grabbed a huge stick and approached a beggar who came too close to the counter. The man shouted at the impudent boy in a menacing and loud voice. Waving his stick, the shopkeeper ordered Leo to get out while he was still good. The boy stood there with his head bowed, justifying that he had no intention of stealing anything. The poor man only asked for a little water and promised to pay for it later. The merchant was even more enraged by the speech and swung his stick, shouting for the annoying boy to get out of the way. But the unfortunate man realized that if he gave up now, he and his sister would never survive in this state. The trader never struck, stopping the stick at the boy's temple and looking at him once again in surprise. The poor man quickly said that he was only asking for what was no longer suitable for sale, chicken legs or heads that would go into the garbage anyway. The shopkeeper scratched the back of his head, wondering if the other traders would mock him for feeding the beggars. The poor man stood with his head bowed and mumbled that he had to take care of his little sister and that they would never forget their master's kindness. The shopkeeper was reluctant, but he finally agreed to give me some money and went to his counter. And now they have food that can hardly be called tasty or very nutritious, but it's at least something. Leo leaned against the wall and was glad that he and his sister had managed to eat at least a little bit, but it would be nice to find somewhere to drink. This city is big enough, and there should definitely be a river next to it, he decided. A young man asked his sister if she knew where the nearest river was. In response, Serga just looked at him with wide eyes. She did not know where to find the river. Surprised by her inexperience, the boy continued to mentally search for a way out of this situation. Looking thoughtfully at the puddle at his feet, the young man thought that if he drank this water, they would probably both get sick. Suddenly, Leo picked up the medallion and began to examine it carefully, hanging from a rope around his neck. He finally realized that the same medallion was also around his sister's neck. It seems that this is some important thing, the boy thought, and why I didn't pay attention to it before. As Helena got to her feet, she asked if it was time to go home because it was getting late. The young man was surprised that they had no water or food, but they had a home. He asked the sister where they should go. The girl smilingly held out her hand to him, telling him not to worry if he didn't remember where their house was, she would show him. Soon, they came to a strange shack that was barely standing, leaning against the back wall of a large house. When asked why they were living in such a place, the girl explained that if the owner of the house found out about their place, he would drive them out. When the sister invited Leo to the shack, he wondered how long they had been begging like this. The promiscuous woman said that she was very tired and wanted to go to bed as soon as possible. Her brother tried to persuade her to at least wash her face before going to bed. The young man's heart broke with pain when he saw Helena in such a state. He found a rag and tried to wipe the dirt off her face. The young man reflected that he did not know what happened to her in the story, but he remembered that face. As he wiped the dirt off the girl's cheeks and forehead with a cloth, he stood there for a moment, gazing into her deep eyes. Surprised, she asked if something was wrong. Upset, the boy replied that nothing had happened and suggested going to bed. A moment later, as soon as she closed her eyes, the poor girl fell into a sound sleep. Lying next to the new Helena, the young man recalled how he thought that in this scenario, everything would work out for him. Recalling the past, the player determined that this new scenario was very difficult from the very beginning. But unlike the previous stories, Leo and Helena's relationship cannot end in marriage, and this is a great advantage. In addition, this Helena is a couple of years younger than the girls from the previous scenarios, and the player thought that he could become a real support for her. He thought that in this world where slavery officially exists, beautiful slaves are a good commodity for slave traders. That's probably why the local Leo was hiding his sister. Maybe that Leo deliberately dirtied his sister's face to protect her from slave traders and did not let her go to the river himself, always bringing water. The player decided that the medallions they both have are somehow connected to their origins, and that this would be a story where Helena defeats her enemies and takes the throne. As the player was falling asleep, he decided that out of the 3 plots, this one had the most understandable ending. The young man was now convinced that the story should be more focused on the second half of the plot. If only he were a little stronger to win. Unbeknownst to him, the boy fell asleep and dreamed that he was still very young and standing in a large and beautifully decorated hall of some majestic castle. There in this dream, he was dressed in very rich royal clothes, playing hide and seek with a little pretty girl whom he called a princess. A little beautifully dressed girl was hiding from him behind a massive curtain by the castle windows. When he found her and picked her up, the little girl was laughing loudly. Before he woke up, the young man said Helena's name and barely opened his eyes and saw her face next to him. Not far from him, his current Helena was sitting on the floor with her arms around her knees in an old, tattered dress. His sister came out of their hut, smiled at him, and said that she had already drunk her share of water from the mug today. The young man noticed that his sister drank much less water than half a mug. After drinking a little water from the mug, he handed the rest of the water to the sire and offered to finish it all. She was surprised, saying that she had already drunk the portion that was meant for her. But when her older brother insisted that she have some more of it, she gladly finished the rest of the cool water. Taking the girl's hand, Leo said that she was probably hungry and they should go into town. They walked out of the corner of their shack and sat on the curb, listening to the traders and shopkeepers shouting out their wares. Listening to the conversations, the young man realized that he was in the city of Orville, the capital of the Kingdom of Veleta, which was fought by the Kingdom of Aston in the last game. Once upon a time, when various races ruled the entire continent, there was an empire that heralded the beginning of the human era after the expulsion of other beings. The young man learned that it was the Arcane Empire, which soon split into 7 kingdoms, one of which was the kingdom that received the largest share of the imperial inheritance, because it was the richest kingdom and the greediest people lived there. The older brother thought that it would be very good if he now had a reliable person whom he could trust to take care of Helena. As the young man stood there thinking about his plans for the near future, he noticed that his sister was leaning to the side, sitting on the stoves. She would have probably fallen to the ground if the boy hadn't quickly picked her up. In a barely audible voice, the poor woman said that she was suddenly dizzy. When he put his hand to her head, the young man felt that she was running a fever and noticed some red spots on her body. After making the girl comfortable against the wall, Leo ordered her to sit here and not move until he found the hospital and returned to her. The boy ran as fast as he could through the unfamiliar streets and looked in all directions, trying to see the hospital building. But no matter how many times he ran through various large and small streets, he never came across a hospital. In desperation, the poor man called out to passers-by, saying that his younger sister needed immediate help, but they passed him by without paying attention. The indifferent crowd of passers-by did not respond to his desperate cries for help. Finally, someone called out to him, forcing him to stop and look around. He was called by an old woman, who told him that he would find a hospital around the corner of this street. The old lady said that if his sister was very sick, he should hurry. Shaking himself off, the boy realized that he was very weak and barely alive. Wasting no time, he ran with all his strength to the place where he had left Helena, and taking her on his back, tried to walk as fast as possible. He was begging his sister to wait a little longer until they got to the hospital, and he thought that Helena's body was so exhausted and weak in this story. Alone and almost exhausted, the young man finally dragged his sister to a building with a sign that said it was a hospital. The exhausted young man knocked on the door, hoping that they would be rescued behind it. In front of him stood a tall man with a stern face, wearing clothes that most likely meant he was a doctor. The doctor looked appraisingly at the vagrants standing in front of him and blocked their passage into the room. The man loudly ordered the Ceramacs to leave immediately if they did not have the money to pay for treatment. In desperation, Leo wanted to slip through the door past the big guy who was blocking the passage. The angry big man grabbed the frail boy by the arm and then pushed both beggars down the stairs in front of the hospital. Trying to get up, the boy first tried to support his unfortunate sister. On his knees, the poor man told the fierce man that his sister was of noble birth and that he would not be able to pay the doctor later. This speech made the big man even more angry, and he shouted at the beggar to stop talking nonsense. A moment later, the angry man hit the boy with a dirty shoe right in the face. Despite this blow, Leo had no intention of backing down. He suddenly remembered that he had a medallion. The guy continued to persuade the doctor, saying that he had a valuable thing that he had recently received. The young man tried to show the doctor his medallion, saying that it was really a jewel of great value. Without listening to anything, the man shouted with all his might that if the beggars did not leave immediately, they would be worse off. Helena was lying motionless on the pavement, and her brother was kneeling next to her with a broken face. A lady from the crowd came up to them and told the doctor that if it was just a matter of money, she would pay and let the poor people into the building. Thinking about what he had said, the big man stopped advancing on the beggars, whom he wanted to do even more harm to. Looking up at the stern face of the defender of the unfortunates, the man finally mumbled that he agreed. The lady was trying to help the boy to stand up, asking how he felt, while the big man picked up the girl. Raising his mutilated face up, Leo tried to say words of gratitude to the unknown woman who saved them. Before he could say everything he was trying to say, the exhausted guy lost consciousness. When Leo regained consciousness, he abruptly sat up on the bench where he had been lying covered with a blanket and looked around in surprise. Continuing to look around the room with one eye because the other was bandaged, the young man tried to figure out where his sister was. After saying Helena's name out loud several times, he heard someone calling out to him from behind the closed door of the room. When he went into another room, he saw his sister lying in a bed next to the lady who had rescued them. But this was clearly not a hospital. Helena's eyes were closed, and red spots were visible on her haggard face. The excited young man asked the lady what the doctor said about the patient's condition, and was told that she had already received all the necessary medications. The woman went on to say that doctors don't understand anything. They are just charlatans who rely on the healing done by priests. The young man was very worried, not knowing what to do next when he heard that the cause of the disease was the food that had such a terrible effect on his weak and exhausted body. The woman went on to say that to determine this, you need to be a doctor, and she understood this from the very beginning. The lady said that now they just had to wait, and Leo wondered what else he could do and whether he should try to find the priest. The woman said that the price of the medicine the priest could give her would be too high, and she could not afford it unless she had to sell her shop. The young man thanked her for her help and said that she did it because she wanted to, and that he could stay here because there were no buyers now anyway. The lady wanted to leave the room, but Leo said he had a question about her name. And when she turned around and looked at him in surprise, he said, as if to justify himself, that he simply did not know how to address her. Looking the young man in the face, the woman said that her name was Cassia. Sitting at Helena's bedside and holding her hand, the young man wondered why the illness could have arisen. Food could not be the cause because they ate the same thing. He recalled that yesterday he had given his sister only clean pieces of meat to eat. Is it possible that Helena's fate was determined at the beginning of the story, or was her illness a planned event in the game? Looking at the state of this Helena, it will not be surprising if she leaves this world right now. It's possible that the help they received from Cassia was also part of the game's planned event, but it is possible that this is not the case, because everything is very serious now. The player thought that this was probably the scenario with the highest starting difficulty level with Helena's serious illness, and in such difficult conditions. Having come to the conclusion that this scenario was impossible to complete, the player decided to think over all the events that had happened to him again. He recalled that from the very beginning of this scenario, his sister told him that she was thirsty, but this morning, she hardly drank the water in the mug. A hunch like a bolt of lightning struck the player's tense brain. Whether the girl could have drunk dirty water from a puddle while he was running around looking for food for them, the young man realized that he had left his sister all alone when he went in search of her. Leo sat by his sister's bedside with his hands over his face, saying that she had to survive and blaming himself for what happened to her. Swallowing bitter tears, he suddenly heard the faint voice of the patient calling him. The guy brought a full mug of water and asked her how she was feeling. The girl asked why her brother had such a sad face and tears, because she had a dream where he was happy and laughing. Leo told her to stop talking and to drink some water and go to rest. The guy hoped that now the patient would drink some water, have a good rest, and tomorrow she would feel much better. Supporting her weak body, the young man spoke kind words to her and persuaded her to drink a little more water. But after a few more minutes, Leo felt that Helena was not breathing. She had left this world. While despairing that he could not save his sister, the young man heard a voice again, thanking him for playing the game of raising Helena. The voice said that Helena de Yarrel was unemployed and single. Leo de Yarrel's last profession was a cobbler, and he was married to Senia. The voice summarized the end of the game and the end of the characters of the beggarly brother and sister. And then he informed me that the player had failed to make Helena a princess. Barely able to contain his feelings, the player listened to the words that he could not protect his younger sister because he was a beggar. As a consolation, he will be provided with money for startup capital. Restart. And now, squinting from the sun, he found himself again on a green lawn under a tall green tree and heard a pleasant girlish voice addressing Leo. Helena, a very familiar figure from his very first game, was approaching the boy, chatting cheerfully. Buna's girlfriend is unhappy that he did not listen to her attentively and did not answer her questions. It was the very first Helena, and he looked breathlessly into her face and thought with joy that he was back. The young woman left, offering to follow her, and the player reflected that he felt as if this first story had happened to him quite recently. If we have to start the whole story all over again, will his brain be able to withstand the constant repetition? But it would be unfair to Helena. In any case, everything will end as soon as she becomes a princess. So, if somehow the girl can remember what happened in the previous scenario, they will never be able to leave this place. The young woman asked him what had happened to him and why he was so thoughtful. The guy was thinking that there could be two possible scenarios now. First, if Helena agrees to go with a high-ranking priestess to the monastery. If he does not interfere and allows her to leave, she will become a priestess and will no longer be able to become a princess. The second option is that he will not allow her to leave, and then they will get married, and Helena will not become a princess again. But neither the first nor the second option is suitable for fulfilling the mission of this game. The boy was despairing, saying that this game was driving him crazy and he could not find the right way out. While thinking in this way, the young man touched his belt and noticed that there was a wallet bag hanging from it, in which he found coins. The guy recalled that at the very end of the last story, a voice told him that he would receive compensation money that would become startup capital. The young man was delighted and thought that with this money, they could go to the Holy Kingdom, or to the capital of the Kingdom of Oran, or to the capital of the Kingdom of Conrad. The event at the church should take place sometime in the fall, he thought, so he and Helena should leave the town by then. But before implementing this plan, the boy decided to go hunting with his father to talk to him and get his blessing. Sitting by the fire with his father over dinner, Leo heard him say that his hunting skills had improved significantly. A little upset by this approval, the boy told his father a story about how he had recently been lucky enough to catch a bear in a trap. When he sold the captured predator, he was able to make a little money. The old hunter was very surprised by this story and asked if the boy was alone when he caught the bear. The young man continued his fictional story, telling how he was able to lure an animal injured by one trap into another trap. The father had his doubts about the story, but he remembered that the boy had shown himself very well today during the hunt. Then the young man told his father that he wanted to help Helena get to the capital's church, no matter what it took, but the girl's family had no money for the trip. The boy was thinking that with the money he had, he could first go to Nevis to earn more money and then go on to Lutetia, but he could not let his friend go on such a dangerous journey alone, nor would his father allow them to go together. The son looked at his father, waiting for an answer. The young man reasoned that even if he did not receive parental permission, he would still have to leave. A few minutes later, an old hunter came out of the house, holding a sacrificial bowl. The man splashed the liquid from the bowl into the fire, performing a hunting rite of blessing. The son was happy and very grateful to his father for his support. It was that clear day again, when friends gathered mushrooms in the forest together and then sat next to each other on a hill. Very soon, the moment should come when Helena decides to tell him that she was planning to become a priestess. But the guy decided not to let her do that and started the conversation first. Looking into his friend's eyes, Leo asked her if she wanted to go on a trip to Nevis with him. The girl was surprised by this unexpected offer, and her friend began to persuade her, saying that this city was the capital of their kingdom, and he dreamed of visiting it. Then the young man told his stunned girlfriend that he had heard that there were many jobs in the capital. Didn't he dream of becoming a hunter? The girl asked. The young man tried to explain that he could become a hunter at any time, and from Nevis, you can then get to Lutetia, where the main church is located. A friend asked how they would get to Nevis because if they walked, the journey would take about 2 months, and it was very dangerous. Smiling, the friend showed her the money from his wallet, saying that they could spend it on a trip. His surprised girlfriend asked him where he got such a lot of money, and if his father had given him this money. The boy replied that his father had given him some of the pots, and he had earned the rest himself, and that he would be very lonely on such a long journey. The young man persuaded Helena to go on a trip with him, but she was still hesitant. But a few minutes later, thanking him for the offer, she replied that she would be happy to go with him. The boy was happy that his persuasion had worked, and now his plan should work. Leo decided that even if he hadn't been with her, the girl would have left town later anyway. On that very day, a small caravan of carts with various goods for sale at the market was leaving the town of Deimos. Then, when the goods were sold out, the carts would return with what the townspeople needed. The boy was happy to help shopkeepers load their goods into carts and then took over driving one of them. The friends decided that it would be better and safer for them to travel with this small caravan. The girl walked alongside the cart, pulled by her friend, and took care of him, giving him a drink of water when he was tired. Smiling at each other and chatting, the friends did not pay attention to the unkind look of a young man with freckles who was also walking with the caravan. Sometime later, in the late afternoon, the procession stopped for a stopover at a small hunting camp. The girl thought that they could stay here for the night, but the boy objected, saying that she should rest in a more convenient city. To all his girlfriend's objections, the young man replied that he had money for a comfortable night's stay. Taking Helena by the hand, he led her with him, not noticing that someone was watching them both very closely. A guy with freckles on his face watched them with squinted eyes and pursed lips. The young people walked hand in hand to the beautiful building of a local hotel. The hotel owner led them to a spacious room with 2 beds and told them to notify him when they were leaving. Wishing the travelers to have a good rest, the hotel owner left the room, and the young woman looked at the real large wooden beds in delight. Dancing with joy, Helena circled around one bed, singing that tonight she would sleep in a real and huge bed. Tired of circling the room, the young woman asked Leo if they could afford such luxurious beds, or if they shouldn't have slept on the floor. The guy said that he had rented only this room for them, so it was not so expensive. Smiling at how angry his friend was at the news, he assured her that he would behave very well. As Leo lay in his bed, he thought that the news of sleeping in the same room had the opposite effect than he had expected. The girl was lying in a large and unusual bed, wondering why she couldn't fall asleep even though she was very tired. Sitting down on her bed, the young woman looked around the unfamiliar room and wondered how her friend fell asleep so quickly. She had never been so far away from her home, so it was comforting to have a familiar person there. Looking into her friend's face, Helena remembered the moment he suggested that she go to Nevis together. She recalled Leo telling her about the money he had saved and saying that he would be lonely without her on the trip. Then she fondly recalled how she had clung to him when they were sitting on a hill next to each other under a tall tree. She bowed her head and thought that she was very grateful to her friend for all this. Suddenly, the young woman heard her friend stir and groan in his sleep. Maybe he had a nightmare, she thought, as she sat down next to him on the bed and put her hand to his forehead. Trying to comfort and calm her sleeping friend, she stroked his head. The young woman reasoned that, in fact, if they hadn't gone on this trip, she would probably have already confessed her feelings to her friend. She thought about how Leo would have reacted to her confession. Perhaps they would fall in love, the girl thought, and suddenly kissed the sleeping young man. Very frightened by this act, The young woman immediately jumped to her feet. Blushing, Helena covered her face with her hands and mumbled an apology for her actions. But she was relieved when her friend snored loudly in his sleep, saying how good it was that he didn't wake up. As she was getting into bed, the young woman said that she was very sorry for what she had done. The girl swore to herself that when she became a priestess, she would give her first blessing to her friend. Leo was the first to wake up in the morning and tried to wake up his girlfriend. Still unable to open her eyes, the girl asked her friend how he was having a good time in the new place, answering that he had had a good rest. The young man pointed out to his friend the place where there was water and a towel to get ready, and left his things in the room because they still had to have breakfast. Leo was torn in all directions when he entered the unfamiliar market square. The boy stopped in surprise when he heard someone calling out to him from behind the counter. He greeted a young man with freckles on his face named Hans, who was from their town and had also come here with the caravan. A fellow countryman also greeted the young man, asking him how he spent the night in this city. An interested Leo asked if they had already managed to sell all the goods and heard that the trade was good and everything was sold out. The guy with the freckles asked if his friend had already eaten breakfast and was told that he was taking care of it right now. Hans seemed overjoyed at the news and wanted to join Leo for breakfast. The young man decided not to refuse his compatriot, and the two of them moved on together. Leo reasoned that there was no reason not to communicate with the guy, but there were rumors that he was not working and was just hiding somewhere. At some point, the boy remembered his way of life in real life, far from the game, and decided that he had no right to judge anyone. He was distracted from these thoughts by the exclamation of a fellow countryman who wanted to ask him something. The young man looked around in surprise, not understanding what this acquaintance wanted to talk to him about. Hans, smiling nastily, asked if he and Helena had slept well together in the same room that night. The boy's gaze hardened as he realized why Hans had become attached to him. Now he was wondering what he should do now, get angry or ignore him. Deciding to turn everything into a joke, the young man smilingly replied that they were so tired that they fell asleep as soon as they entered the room. The guy with the freckles was about to say something insulting, but stopped when Helena called out to them as she approached. The girl was quite surprised by Hans's presence, but still greeted him. Leo told the girl that they were going to have breakfast together. Sitting at the same table in the restaurant, the young people ordered a hearty breakfast. With the look of a connoisseur, Hans started a conversation about how his friends had chosen a bad path because they would have to make a big hook to reach their goal. Leo replied that they had no other choice because there were no caravans with whom they could travel. He arrogantly called Leo an ignorant, impudent man and said that where there are shops, there are probably caravans. The arrogant man went on to say that he believed there were probably several such caravans heading west from here. To the young man's surprise, the know-it-all said that he could easily introduce him to the right people. Continuing to brag, Hans said that he is quite well versed in these lands and in this area, and has the necessary connections. The braggadocio blabbered that he would find out everything quickly and told me to just trust him. When the three of them entered the large square, Hans turned to some respectable merchants in a friendly manner to greet them. A richly dressed merchant asked the guy with the freckles if he had successfully sold his goods. Then the know-it-all said that his friends needed to get to the city of Nevis, and maybe Then the know-it-all said that the merchant replied that they were not going directly to Nevis, but in the same direction, and offered to introduce the young people to the managers of other caravans. My friends were very happy to hear such a good offer. The journey will be 2 weeks, the merchant said, and he has to give up a lot of goods to take 2 people with him, so it will cost 5 silver coins. Here, showing great interest in this issue, Hans began to persuade the merchant to take his friends and reduce the price a little because they did not have much money. The venerable merchant pretended to think about the proposal and then said he would see the youth later. Turning around, a respectable gentleman in rich clothes went about his business, leaving the young people standing in the middle of the square. Happy that everything worked out so well, Leo thanked his friend, whose efforts helped them save money and time. Helena also thanked the guy with the freckles from the bottom of her heart, and he replied that he had done his best to make her trip comfortable. Smiling, Hans replied that his help was not worthy of gratitude. Helena thought to herself that she had been wrong to think of him as a slacker, but now her opinion has changed for the better. At night, when it was far from sunrise, the caravan set out in complete darkness. The friends were sitting in the wagon with their backs to each other. The boy thought that this story and journey would probably be too long. His girlfriend called him and asked him if he thought they would have to work year-round when they arrived in Nevis. After answering this question in the affirmative, he realized that he had lied because he wanted to raise money to send his girlfriend to the Holy Kingdom. But the young man realized that with such prices in the capital, it would be difficult to save up for a trip to Lutetia, even if he worked for several years. They will not go to the Holy Kingdom because Helena is supposed to be a princess, not a priestess. Helena asked him what kind of work she would have to do in the city to raise the money she needed. The friends said that she could work in a bakery because her aunt told her how good she was, but Helena said that she only knew how to knead dough. With her head bowed, the girl listened to her friend tell her that they would be able to earn good money in the capital. At the time, the boy was thinking that if they hadn't gone on the trip now, Helena would have met a priestess on her way to the capital's church. Maybe that would be the best thing for the girl, but let her forgive him because he has to make her a princess. After a grueling journey to the staging area, Leo, with the help of a reputable trader, contacted a new caravan that was leaving for Nevis the next day. The guy arranged for his girlfriend to go on vacation and went out on business. When he entered a shop selling weapons, The young man asked the shopkeeper if he could buy a sword, but was told that he needed a permit to do so. The confused young man mumbled that he did not have a permit and asked if it was possible to buy a weapon this time without a permit. The young man tried to explain to the shopkeeper that he needed the sword for defense and begged him to turn a blind eye to the fact that he did not have a permit. But after listening to those persuasions, the trader became suspicious of the stranger. Looking closely at the young man, the shopkeeper noticed that he seemed to resemble some kind of bandit. Pointing to the marks on the stranger's hand, the trader asked what they were and assumed that the young man belonged to some criminal clan. Surprised, Leo replied that the mark on his arm was made by his own father, who also has such a mark, and the shopkeeper asked what the young man's father did for a living. The young man replied that his father was a hunter, and the shopkeeper smilingly said that the stranger might not be a local bandit. Finally, the arms dealer agreed to help a strange customer who really wanted to buy a gun. The shopkeeper led the boy to another room where various swords hung on the walls and various shields stood in a row against the wall. Looking at the goods, Leo noticed that he saw only one-handed swords, which earned the respect of the shopkeeper, who said that he must not be a bandit if he was so experienced with weapons. The boy said that he had already said this 100 times, but the shopkeeper replied that it was hard to take a stranger's word for it. Then the merchant took the young man to another room and showed him completely different swords. Taking each of the new swords in his hands, Leo noticed that they were not even balanced. This knowledge surprised the shopkeeper, who said that he was an expert in shield making and that he forged swords just for fun so he could sell the sword he chose cheaply. The buyer chose one of the swords on offer, thinking that he would have an imperfect weapon and that his ability to use it would come in handy. When the young man returned to the room where he had left Helena to rest, and curiously began to ask where he had been all this time. Smiling, Leo said that he went to buy beer and added that when they lived in the town, they did not have the opportunity to drink because they always had to be careful. Surprised by this suggestion, the young woman asked if they would get into trouble if they drank beer, and was surprised to hear from his friend that the god Vinar might not approve of their behavior. The young man convinced his girlfriend that even priests sometimes drink strong drinks during various religious ceremonies. One day, she will also become a priestess, so let her take beer tasting as a practical lesson, the boy said, assuring his friend that god Vinar would understand. In addition, the friend reminded Helena that she would soon become an adult and could drink such drinks as beer. After listening to all these arguments, Helena agreed to drink, but only a small sip. Pleased with his speech, the young man gave his friend a full mug of frothy drink. Having tasted the drink from the mug, the girl shouted that it was surprisingly delicious. A few minutes later, the young woman told her friend that she was dizzy from the drink, laughing, and he replied that it made sense. The cunning guy wanted to wait until his girlfriend got even more intoxicated to ask her about the past. He began to ask the drunken Helena if she remembered the summer before last, and she replied that of course she remembered all their adventures. The girl told us how they fell into a waterfall together, and Leo was so cool that he was able to save her and swim out on his own. Then she recalled a story when Leo accidentally rang the church bell and the residents thought there was a fire and ran away. Laughing, the young man said that they have many common and funny memories and thought that the further he went, the more he became a real Leo. His friend smiled gently at him, saying that he was very nice and whether he was up to something. If only his girlfriend knew that he was not the real Leo, he thought, and smiled at her drunkenly, saying that she was planning to become a priest. Picking up his intoxicated girlfriend in his arms, the boy carried her into the room, laughing and asking if she would give him her blessing when she became a real priestess. Taking his talkative girlfriend to bed, the guy was sure that he had made the right decision to build an invisible wall between them. The drunken young woman first loudly exclaimed that she was a future priest and he should obey her in everything, and then quickly fell asleep. Smiling, the boy decided that he should not drink too often with his girlfriend. The next morning, the friends met with a man recommended to them by the owner of the caravan with whom they had come to town. Speaking gently to the couple, he told them that everything in Nevis was very expensive, but he knew a landlord who would be sympathetic to their needs. When he entered the house with the young people, he greeted the owner who was standing at the entrance in a friendly manner. The owner of the house also seemed to greet the newcomers very happily and affectionately. The attendant asked the owner to provide a room for the young couple to stay. The mustachioed man replied that he had a room for two, but there were so many guests that there were not enough rooms for everyone. The attendant sycophantically asked to give the young people at least the most ordinary room and to give them a discount on the price for the sake of their acquaintance. The owner of the house asked how long the couple wanted to stay and heard from Leo that if they got a discount, they would stay for a long time, but first they needed to find a job. The mustachioed man said, as if thinking about it, that if they were going to live here for a long time, they needed a nice room, and called the young couple to follow him up the stairs to see the room. Looking back at the man who had brought them, the owner ordered him to wait downstairs and promised to pay back what he owed from the last time. When they entered the luxurious room, the owner was pleased to see how pleasantly surprised and impressed the young people were. Looking at the rich furniture, Helena said that this room was much better than their previous home. Pleased with the impression he made, the owner said that just because they were friends of his friend and because they seemed to be decent people, he would not charge them much. Leo was shocked and upset to hear that the owner was willing to rent them a room for only 3 silver coins. When the mustachioed man saw the boy's reaction, he asked him if it was expensive, and with a strained smile, the boy replied that it was fine. He had that kind of money. The satisfied owner said that everything was fine then and left the room. Helena was delighted with their new home, and the young man explained to her that this beautiful room was cheaper than other offers because it was on the edge of town. The young woman was pleased with the view from the window and suggested that her friends stay here for a long time if they could find work nearby. The girl continued to spin enthusiastically around the room and run up to the window to look at the view. She said goodbye to the acquaintance who had brought them to this hotel when he had already left the house. Chirping happily, Leo's friend told him that the man was a very nice man and it would be nice to meet him again someday. The young people agreed to go for a walk and see the city center. They were excited to see the huge castle. The girl looked around with delight and wondered if it was always so crowded, and Leo thought that this city was very similar to a scenario with beggars. Suddenly, the surprised friends saw a huge crowd of people in front of a stage on which young men were standing in handcuffs. This was a slave market where slaves were sold, and the trader would put up slaves for auction, praising their qualities and loudly shouting their price. The friends stood amazed to hear the trader shouting out the price of the slaves, raising it each time, and the crowd shouting back. The player recalled that in the betrothal scenario, there were various wild tribes that were treated as barbarians in the central and southern kingdoms. This means that in that scenario, Helena the warrior does not have many princes to meet, only the princes from Aston Aster and the Holy Kingdom. The boy heard his frightened friend address him, asking him to leave as soon as possible because she could not bear to see such horror. The friends went on, and Leo said that they could probably find work if they went to the castle. An unidentified man wearing a military helmet and holding a spear called out to the young man, ordering him to come over. The soldier asked if it was his weapon, pointing to the sword on the guy's belt. Another man, also dressed in military uniform, approached them and asked if Leo was a mercenary. The young man replied that he was not a mercenary, to which the military replied why he was trying to enter the castle with weapons and that he had at least hidden his sword. The young man sincerely assured the guards that he did not know that it was forbidden to bring weapons into the castle and that he had just arrived in Nevis and was looking for a job. One of the guards asked the young man to give him a sword, and Leo decided to fulfill the request to avoid a quarrel with the military. In his defense, the guy said that he bought the weapon on the way to the city only for self-defense. Both guards began to examine the sword, saying that the weapon was in very poor condition and that the weight of the sword was focused on the tip of the point and it could easily break. The guard said that he saw no reason to confiscate such a weapon, but that carrying weapons was strictly prohibited on the territory of the castle, so it was better to leave the sword outside. The boy promised the guards to be very careful and attentive with his weapon. But then one of the soldiers noticed a tattoo on the guy's arm and asked if he was a bandit. The boy vehemently denied it and said that his own father had given him the tattoo. Helena said it was true because her friend had a tattoo on his arm since childhood. One of the guards was still hesitating, and the other said that they could let them through, that there were no bandits so stupid as to go into the castle with a sword that was not even balanced. Finally, the guards allowed the young people to enter the castle, ordering them to be very careful in the future. The girlfriend started scolding Leo, saying that he didn't need the sword if he didn't know how to handle it, and was so clumsy even getting it out. Then she started to say why the sword was defective, but she was very amused when her friend told the guards that he wanted to protect her with this sword. The boy could hardly contain himself listening to his girlfriend tell him how stupid he was and had a strong desire to shout that he knew how to use a gun very well. Finally, they reached the bakery, and Leo stayed outside and heard the lady who ran the bakery say that she needed an assistant. The bakery owner told the girl to come back the next day because she wanted to see how the new employee would work before she could set her wages. The girl was happy and assured the woman that she would definitely come back tomorrow, and she walked out of the bakery and told her friend that everything went well. Leo was unhappy that his girlfriend had not been told how much money she would receive. He told her that she shouldn't be like a naive child and trust everything. The girlfriend told him not to worry. She would get the salary she deserved. Boasting. The young woman said that she could tell good people from the first time she saw them, and that the woman from the bakery was very kind. Smiling, the boy said that the woman in the bakery must have seemed nice to the girl because she looked like Hans's aunt, who worked for her in their town. Then the friends went to a blacksmith shop where Leo wanted to find a job for himself. He told the owner that he had a little experience in this business because he helped his father with his work. The owner of the smithy was sure that the pay would be very good if the boy worked hard. Pleased that they managed to arrange a job for both of them so quickly, the young people decided to go on vacation. The friends intended to spend the night in the same nice hotel where they spent the previous night. The young man was pleased that he had shown Helena how to look for a job and had almost found one for her, and now he could start looking for information about the prince. He deliberately chose a place of work far away from the bakery where Helena would be working, so he could secretly search for the prince. Young people approached their hotel feeling a bit uneasy because everything looked different from yesterday. Upon entering the door, the friends were almost numb when they saw many armed young men with evil faces behaving defiantly in the hotel hall. The owner of the hotel, standing behind the counter, gritted his teeth, saying that he had been waiting for his guests for a long time. Impressed by the strange atmosphere in the room, the young man told the owner that they were going to rest. The young man noticed that each of the young men in the hall was holding a weapon and assumed that they were mercenaries. Surprised by how everything had changed here, the young people stood in indecision before the stairs to the second floor to their room. A large, stout man was coming down the stairs from the second floor, holding a huge shield. Instantly, the young man pulled his sword from his belt and ordered Helena to stand behind him. The young men in the audience also jumped up, each grabbing for his weapon. Holding his imperfect sword tightly, Leo said that he did not understand what was happening here, but believed that his opponents should retreat. One of the attackers told the young man that he was resisting in vain and that he would be sold soon. With hatred and horror, the boy recalled the slave market he and his friend had seen in the city center. Then the closest of the attackers raised his axe and rushed at Leo. An unknown man, sitting calmly at the hotel desk, told the owner that the boy should be beaten, but not killed. Repelling the attack, Leo shouted to the offender to move away because he would not hold back any longer. Trying to protect Helena, the boy pushed her behind his back away from the attacker. The enemy, furious at his failure, rushed back into the fight with an axe. Covering Helena, who crouched in the corner near the stairs, the young man held his sword tightly and prepared for new attacks. Now the boy had to fight off 2 armed thieves. The young man skillfully dodged the blow that the attacker was trying to inflict on him from behind. The young man quickly ducked and crouched down and knocked the thief down. The other daring young men in the room, looking at Leo's skill, mumbled that they did not agree with what was happening and were in no hurry to fight. Having repelled this attack, the boy looked at his opponents, holding the hilt of his sword tightly. The man behind the desk snapped at the hotel owner, saying that a simple hunter from a remote town could fight so skillfully. The young man realized that the situation was getting worse because the mercenaries from the room blocked his way out with shields, and there were too many of them against him. Waving his sword, he rushed at the thieves who blocked his path. The mercenaries did not expect such a powerful attack, and several of them were knocked down. With all his might, the boy shouted for Helena to run to him as quickly as possible. But at that moment, one of the attackers managed to get up and stabbed Leo in the thigh with a dagger. Groaning in pain and pushing himself, the young man pulled the dagger out of his wound. Suddenly, Leo heard his friend calling out to him, shouting about the danger of an attack from behind. But the young man did not have time to react to this warning, and the heavy-set attacker struck him hard on the head. He heard Helena's desperate scream through the thick fog. With this strong punch, the big man managed to disarm Leo, whose sword and dagger, which he had obtained in battle, were lying on the floor. The young man tried to regain consciousness, but Helena's scream was still in his ears. One of the attackers with a weapon again attacked the girl's unarmed defender. With all his will, Leo tried to reach for his sword and get up and fight again. And then the young man saw a big thief grab his girlfriend, who was resisting with all her might. Desperately shouting Helena's name, the hero grabbed his weapon and got to his feet, ready to fight. With his sword, the skillful warrior aptly deflected a dagger flying at his chest. Leo, already tired and exhausted from his wound, stood firmly holding his sword in his hands in front of his opponent with an axe. Despite his painful wounds, the defender skillfully repelled the attacker's strong blows. At that time, the girl was trying to escape from the strong arms of the big man who was holding her. In his rage at this resistance, the big man crushed the frail girl so hard that she was hoarse and could not say a word. The big man at the counter, who turned out to be a slave trader, barked at him that he should be careful not to damage the goods for tomorrow's auction. The slave trader also muttered unhappily that it was ridiculous to watch 10 mercenaries fail to overcome one small boy. Hearing all this talk, the young man finally realized that his Helena was going to be sold into slavery. This gave him fury and great strength, and he was able to defeat an opponent who was stronger than himself. The defeated thief Leo fought fell to the floor at his feet. Suddenly, the dispassionate voice of the game sounded in the young man's head, saying that he had achieved his first victory, and now Leo would feel less guilty about taking someone's life. All the thieves in the room heard the boy's quiet voice, saying that he would destroy them all. But unfortunately, there were too many armed mercenaries in the room against him. Several thieves did not hesitate to attack their lone opponent together. But the number of attackers and their fury and cunning no longer frightened the young man, who decided to fight to the end. The new attackers kept trying to hit him with different weapons. The forces were unequal, and no matter how agile the guy was, he missed more and more punches. The brave boy had no intention of giving up each time he threw himself at the thieves again and again. Apparently, such an unbending will of the young man began to irritate the slave trader, and he ordered the mercenaries to send him to the other side. Once again, getting up after the blow, Leo reflected that he could barely avoid dangerous blows when using his sword skills. The boy realized that his strength was leaving him, and he could barely hold his sword in his hands. Then he heard Helena's voice, begging to spare her friend, and promising to do whatever she was ordered to do. The slave trader, smiling predatory and mockingly, asked her if she was not lying when she said this. Then the thief ordered his thugs not to kill the young man, but only to take away his sword. With renewed vigor, the mercenaries rushed at their already exhausted victim. Despite his predicament, the boy continued to fight off the pack with his imperfect sword. But the forces were clearly unequal, and the hero felt that he would not be able to defeat all his enemies. A strong blow from one of the attackers knocked the exhausted boy to the floor again. He was unable to get up and was attacked by a bunch of angry mercenaries. Already lying on the floor, the young man was still trying to fight back with his last strength. But the forces were very unequal, and he was pinned to the floor, not allowed to move. The slave trader approached Helena, who was still holding the big man, and asked her if she remembered her promise and would do what he told her. Bitter tears ran from the girl's eyes. She was in complete despair, but there was no way out of the situation. With a predatory smile, the slave trader said that there was no time to prepare, but that everything must work, and ordered Helena to follow him. The girl, who was being dragged out of the room by the thief, heard Leo, who was being held by a pack of mercenaries, shouting her name. Almost losing consciousness, the young man saw the silhouette of his girlfriend, who was being led out of the hotel hall by the slave trader and his accomplices. When the boy finally came to, he realized that he was tied to a column near the stables. Feeling severe pain in his wounded body, at first the young man could not understand where he was, but then he remembered what happened to his friend. The young man was shouting his girlfriend's name with all his might, but no one answered him. He did not understand at what point in the story everything went wrong. Recalling the last few days, he decided that they had been sold by the vendor who had brought them to the hotel, and realized in despair how naive he had been. The guy heard someone asking him if he was awake, and there was a slave trader with 2 strong mercenaries standing in front of him. Leo struggled to raise his head and asked where his friend was, to which the thief smiled and said that the boy hadn't yet woken up. The thief ordered his strong henchman to grab the bound and exhausted boy. A young man who could not move was blindfolded and gagged, lifted up and dragged into a wagon. Lying on the floor with his eyes and hands tied and moaning in pain, the boy could not understand what was happening. He heard the words of a slave trader who said that the girl had been sold for a prince, and for some reason, the castle wanted to buy this boy as well. Still feeling pain all over his body, the boy heard the dispassionate voice of the game, saying that Helena's last profession was predetermined, and thanked him for playing Raising Helena. The young man listened to a speech that Helena's last profession was a concubine of the prince's last profession was a thug. The meaning of the story is the end of childhood friendship and belonging to the prince. The player was desperate because in this story, Helena was not a princess again, but only a plaything for the prince. Listening to the voice further, the young man found out how this scenario ended. Helena was sold to princes to save the life of her childhood friend. She became a concubine and secretly helped him escape before ending her existence. Leo was captured by mercenaries, transported to the castle, managed to escape from there, then took revenge on the thieves, but could not get to the prince because of the execution and ceased to exist. The player begged the soulless game to stop, saying he didn't want to play it anymore. For a moment, Mincio even managed to recall the face of his real-life lover, Jaeha, and in despair, he realized that he had been in this game for more than a year. The voice has passed a verdict that Leo was too trusting and destroyed many characters out of revenge, and he will have access to the information of the alley rules. Restart. Once again, the boy looked around and saw himself standing on a snowy lawn with a sword in his hand and a warrior woman standing next to him. At the same moment, the player recalled everything that happened last time in this scenario. Standing on the training ground, the guy thought that he missed Helena very much, but his mind was still on the scenario he had just lost. The player analyzed his mistakes, recalling the details that Hans must have told the merchant that if they disappeared, no one would look for them. The boy recalled an unusual sign on the door of the hotel, which meant that this place accepted those who were about to be sold. But she and her friend were completely naive and did not know about it, and even paid the thieves to get to the slave market themselves. The young man was brought back to the present reality by a smiling girl who offered to finish the training this time. This time, the player adapted to this scenario quite quickly, but the opponent noticed that something in his behavior changed a little. A surprised Helena asked why his seizure during training was so unusual. The young man explained that it was a trick to bypass her defense, and he thought it was all due to his sword skills and training in this scenario the previous time. The boy reasoned that if everything went on as it was, the young woman would go hunting, and it would end badly, and her father would go camping instead. And Leo remembered the last time Helena the warrior was going on a campaign and promised him to come back as a real knight. The boy looked at his friend and thought about the fact that he already knew that a military campaign was coming soon. Suddenly, the young woman grabbed her friend's arm and deftly applied a technique that made him fall into a snowbank next to her. The young men were still lying next to each other, holding hands, and their training wooden swords were lying in the snow. The girl was smiling happily. She enjoyed spending time together with her fiancé. The boy smiled back at her and continued to recall in detail the further development of events in this scenario. He thought that the two of them would still not be able to catch the mythical fox, so they would have to go on a campaign together on the battlefield. Looking into Helena's face, he decided that this time he would definitely be able to protect her. From the very first light of the next day, the young man was already at the training ground and doing sword exercises. It seemed to the young man that with every punch, he was becoming more and more agile and skilled. Helena approached him, surprised, asking why he woke up so early today. The boy said hello to his surprised friend, who was worried that he was training too hard because it was still early in the morning. The girl looked at Leo, who replied with a very serious look that there was no need to worry. Everything was fine. The thoughtful young woman stared intently at her friend's face. She remembered that when they first met, he was a very boring boy. 3 years ago, she was with her father, and he was with his father, the Lord. The Lord greeted the audience with a friendly greeting, saying that his name was Noel Dexter, and the boy was sadly silent. Young Helena stood in front of the boy and looked him in the face with a challenge, crossing her arms over her chest. At the time, she could not even imagine that they would soon be engaged. Leo brought the young woman back to reality by asking her what brought her here. After leaving her memories, the girl smiled sincerely and said that she had come to him to tell him that they would finally have a chance to become real knights. Helena, beaming with happiness, said that this time her father was allowing them both to join the hunt. Alarmed by the news, the young man recalled how the last time he went hunting. It seemed to him that he remembered every moment of the dangerous hunt that had taken place in this scenario the last time, recalling how she and her friend were side by side in the ranks of warriors fighting a terrible creature. Now, just like last time, Helena went on her first hunt and, as expected, found the prince of the mythical fox. Just like last time, the young people invited everyone, and Dehorman gathered his entire team. The brave soldiers tried their best to restrain the wounded and angry beast. Despite the fact that the skillful warriors were determined to win, the fierce beast had no intention of submitting to them. The power and fury with which the creature attacked the hunters showed that it was not a common beast, but a real mythical fox. The wounded mystical fox broke away from her pursuers by breaking all the ways that held her. Now, the angry creature was ready to start hunting for its offenders. The warriors of the tribe scattered in different directions to avoid being struck by the fierce beast. But the brave leader of the tribe, Dehorman, was not in a mood to retreat. Clutching his weapon tightly in his hands, he shouted that he would deal with the enemy himself. The warrior kept his giant axe at the ready and did not move as the monster slowly approached him, making a terrible growl. The leader thought he was alone with a fierce mythical monster, but with his keen hearing, he heard the arrows his comrades had fired whistling through the air, and the mythical fox slowed its advance. The eyes of the furious creature were now focused only on its main enemy. 949. The brave warrior, Dehorman, did not even try to stop the battle and escape, taking advantage of the fact that the beast slowed its advance toward him. The leader was ready to attack, waving his dangerous weapon over his head. The wounded but undefeated mythical fox was also preparing to jump. The warrior was intensely watching every movement of the animal when he heard one of his comrades give the command to shoot at the beast together. The attack was incredible because at such moments, demonic beings show great strength. The mythical fox, having been wounded even more by arrows, gathered all her strength and rushed at the enemy in front of her. But this did not faze the experienced warrior who was ready for such an attack. In a moment, this fierce confrontation ended in a glorious victory for Dehorman. Helena joyfully shouted her congratulations and threw her arms around her father's neck. At that moment, Leo's mind wondered if the girl's participation in the military campaign was really inevitable. Time passed, spring came, and with it, the news of a military campaign. Like the last time, the boy went to the library where his father was sitting in a chair reading a book. Lord Noel, who had not expected this visit, looked up at his son in surprise. Standing in front of his father, the boy said that he too wanted to go on this military campaign. The young man was ready to give his father 100 arguments why he should go on a hike, but he was not expecting to hear his father's consent. The young man thanked the Lord for his understanding, but was confused as to why his reaction was not the same as the last time he had been in the same scenario. The young man decided that he was able to get the permit so easily because he was good at training this time and was in good physical shape. Saying that he had to go to training with his partner, Leo wanted to leave the library. Closing the book, Noel told his son to wait and asked him if he knew what the mission of the army was. The father took the young man to a table where he laid out a map and other documents and explained how the army operates and what the role of each unit is. It turned out that the military of this world operates in standardized units consisting of 10 people. The boy thought that this style of warfare was somewhat reminiscent of modern guerrilla tactics. And if hundreds of warriors gather in one area, it can lead to a disaster due to the massive bombardment of wizards. Leo asked his father why he didn't want to take part in the military operation himself, and he heard a firm answer that the Lord was tired of killing people. Noel said that if someone invaded the kingdom of Aston, he would fight like a knight without hesitation, but a military campaign is something else entirely. The father asked if his son remembered the battle for the throne where he received his title. Then young Noel became the youngest of the knights and was very proud of it, but it did not last long. In the former kingdom of Aston Aster, which was once united, a civil struggle began. A young king who had recently been given the throne was killed under mysterious circumstances. The young king had no descendants, so his brothers began to claim the throne. Thus began the most brutal battle in history. The battle lasted for 3 years and brought much grief, but ended in nothing because the two brothers were killed by their own sons. These sons declared themselves kings and concluded a treaty. Thus the kingdom of Aston Aster was established in the northern part of the continent. Recalling those events, Noel said that he realized how ridiculous it all was. After hearing these memories and reflections, Leo stood silently in front of his father, thinking about what he had said. As always, Helena was ready to train and called her friend to join her. The girl told Leo that he didn't have to go camping with her, that he should stay at home. She told the boy that if he went on a hike and died in vain, she would have to become a widow. The guy was amused by the bride's assumption and said that it would be better if she was more careful not to leave him a widower. Looking intently into the guy's eyes, Helena asked him if he would be alone for the rest of his life if something happened to her. The young man tried to turn it into a joke, saying that it all depends on her behavior. Irritated by this answer, the young woman rushed at him with a training sword, saying that he should have answered that he would be alone forever. Deftly repelling his friend's attack with a wooden sword, the young man smiled. The boy replied that if this military campaign was inevitable, he would do everything to ensure that the two of them returned from it unharmed. After all the speeches, the training battle between the young people broke out with renewed vigor. The young people skillfully conducted attacks against each other and skillfully repelled the enemy's blows. All this time, the boy was thinking only that he did not want his girlfriend to die alone like the last time. But he probably shouldn't have gone so deep into his thoughts while distracted by the competition with his friend. With a series of deft strokes, the girl managed to knock the sword out of the enemy's hands. This time, Leo lost the fight to his more agile and skillful opponent. His girlfriend scolded him, saying that if he cheered in the clouds during a real battle, he would not survive. The boy was so focused on the campaign that he decided to think of a plan to make Helena a princess after the battle. Time passed and a military campaign began, in which this time, Leo was with his bride. The young people were in the same unit, so they were almost always close to each other. After a long walk, Helena sat down on a log, tired, and kicked off her boots. The young man, speaking to her in a stern tone, said that he had told her not to drag her feet on the ground. The surprised girl saw the young man carrying a barrel of water to her. Putting the barrel on the ground in front of Jelena, he ordered her to dip her injured leg in the water. The girl was very surprised and upset by the burn, and the boy said that it was better to make it not hurt than to cut the callus. The young woman asked how he knew that her leg hurt because she hadn't said anything about it. Tenderly caring for his fiancée, Leo replied that he already knew everything about her. Finally, she said that she was feeling much better and asked how he managed to be so calm all the time. The young man thought that it turned out that the time he spent in the army in his real life could be useful in a situation like this. A young man told his girlfriend to rest a bit after a difficult transition. He took full responsibility for setting up the tent for both of them. The young woman continued to sit on the log and reflected on how strange her friend was behaving. Finally, Leo managed to set up a large tent where they will be able to stay for the night. Tired from the hard journey of the day, the boy settled down to rest. But his hopes for rest were not realized, because Helena came into the tent, clearly intending to talk. The girl settled down next to him, playfully asking if he remembered that they were engaged. The guy was smiling gently, looking into the face of his bride. The girl blushed under the scrutiny of her friend. Then Leo had to blush when his girlfriend asked when they would become a real husband and wife. Since the boy didn't respond to this, his girlfriend was offended. And then she attacked him, saying that he stinks and needs to take a bath if he wants to sleep in the same tent with her. The boy jokingly fought back, telling her to leave him alone and suggesting that she just go to bed. In arguing in this way, they made a noise that was heard by the residents of the tents next to them. 2 months into the campaign, minor skirmishes have left a certain mark on the soldiers, with losses occurring almost every day. Each time, Leo found it easier and easier to win these small battles. One day, the guard of their camp shouted loudly that he saw knights nearby. Indeed, 2 people in knightly garb, a young man and a woman with red hair, were hiding in the bushes. The strangers realized that their hiding place had been exposed by a group of armed men approaching them. The young knight was nervous, but the red-haired lady was not at all confused and behaved very confidently. The warriors of the tribe wasted no time in bravely attacking the enemy knights. The red-haired warrior was very skillful with her weapon, easily repelling the attackers' attacks. She shouted loudly to her partner, calling him Deros, so that he would not be afraid because their opponents were simple soldiers, no match for knights. Obeying the order of his partner, the young man exclaimed that knights are not afraid of anything, and rushed into battle. Despite his young age, the knight was good with weapons and skillfully repelled the attacks of his attackers. The young knight did not stop for a minute, striking his opponents blow after blow. More than one tribal warrior has fallen to the sword of the brave young knight. Leo and Helena were surprised at the losses to their unit caused by these 2 knights. Side by side, the friends rushed to the invincible warrior named Deros. The young knight deftly deflected the attacks of his attackers, but his current opponents were more experienced than ordinary soldiers. The red-haired warrior was still dissatisfied with the young knight's fight and exclaimed that he was acting like a girl because he could not overcome 5 soldiers. The knight said that Ms. Katrina was mistaken because his opponents were not so weak. Leo froze when he heard this name, remembering that the last time he had seen Helena in this scenario, it was Katrina who had taken her life. Even the sound of this name made the young man's eyes darken and his head spin. A hateful name that he can never forget because it is Helena's main enemy. These thoughts seemed to give the young man new strength in the battle that was going on right now. He and Helena worked well together as a pair, almost taking turns attacking the young knight. He showed remarkable courage and strength in facing 2 such surprisingly strong opponents. Finally, the girl managed to deliver such a powerful blow that it knocked the enemy back a few steps. Surprised by the unexpected strength and skill of a seemingly not very dangerous opponent, the knight called out to Katrina for help. Another warrior from their squad rushed to Leo and Helena's aid, and 2 soldiers fought alongside the red-haired fury. Katrina dealt with 2 soldiers who attacked her and shouted to Deros to stop joking and fight to the fullest. Her fellow knight could only reply that he was not joking and was fighting with all his might. At the same moment, Leo, swinging his sword with renewed vigor, attacked him. Remembering how this battle could end for Helena, her fiancé had no intention of sparing his opponents. Leo felt that the young knight was already tired and less agile. The The thought of protecting his bride gave the young man additional strength in this dangerous competition. Now it was Helena's turn to do her share of the attacking. She struck with her sword and wounded the young knight, who finally managed to throw her away, and Leo entered the battle again, trying to win the final victory. Finally, the young man dealt a decisive strong blow to his opponent, which put an end to this battle. At the same moment, Leo heard the game's voice announce that the player had received the Lone Knight achievement. Each time he meets a knight, he will become even stronger. Standing over the defeated knight, the young man reasoned that the knights were very strong, and it took 5 warriors to defeat one of them. But the battle was not yet over. Katrina loudly called out to her associate Daros. After a moment, her forehead darkened as she realized that the young knight was defeated. Like a fury from the sky, she rushed with her striking sword at the warriors of the tribe. The red-haired warrior's attack was lightning fast and deadly for her opponents. Her sword seemed to be enchanted, as it struck in all directions with the speed of lightning. The furious knight showed no mercy to her enemies, striking them down one by one. When she stopped her perilous dance, Leo called out to her, calling her name Katrina. The red-haired fury, fixing her hair, which had become disheveled during the battle, asked how the boy knew her name. The boy, holding his sword at the ready, remembered that the last time Helena had died in this scenario, it was around the time he was now. The young man was thinking about the game's development because in this version of the plot, he was directly confronted with the one that caused the death of his fiancée last time. The warrior asked sternly which of the 2 young men had impressed Daros. Leo replied with a challenge that it was he who had defeated the young knight in battle. The angry fury was looking at the young man's face and reflecting on the fact that the power of mana, given to people by the gods, is present everywhere, but not everyone knows how to use it. While striking him, she seemed to feel an unknown force in the boy, as if he had mana. Although the young man's sword skills were not perfect, his extensive experience in battles was an advantage. The knight, holding back her blows, said that the boy was a very professional fighter despite his young age. Katrina's lips tightly pressed together. She tried to understand why Daros had lost to this guy. The red-haired warrior realized that if she was not careful in this battle, she too could be defeated. Leo listened to his feelings and realized that his strokes had become stronger, perhaps because he had gained a new achievement in the game. The young man heard the warrior say through her teeth that he fought quite well for a simple soldier. With an ominous smile, she said that time was still not on the guy's side, and now she would fight to the fullest. The surprised young man thought that the warrior's eyes turned red and seemed to radiate some unknown power. It seemed like time had stopped and nothing existed around them but their fight. And then there was a moment in the battle when it seemed that the knight was about to win, dealing crushing blows to Leo. At that moment, as if from the ground, Helena appeared in front of her, protecting her fiancé with her sword. The girl did not hesitate to attack the invincible warrior with fury. In a moment, her fiancé was already there, having recovered from the blow. The red-haired fury really had a special gift, and it seemed that young people would never be able to defeat her. And once again, Helena rushed to deflect the knight's blows to give her friend a breather. Leo did not let his friend stay in the fight with the fury for long because he realized the extraordinary power that emanated from this woman. These coordinated attacks by the young couple really irritated the red-haired warrior. Fiercely attacking her enemies, Katrina seemed more like a mythical character than an ordinary knight. The thing was that the red-haired warrior noticed that the girl was weaker than the boy and decided to get rid of her first. The knight dodged Leo's attacks and directed her attack only at the weaker opponent. The fury finally achieved its goal by sending a devastating blow to the girl. After screaming frantically, Helena felt as if lightning had struck her right hand and realized that her arm had been severed from her body. Disarmed and severely wounded as if in a last-ditch effort, the young woman ran at Katrina and knocked her down. Not realizing what had happened to his friend, Leo also threw himself at the knight, pinning her to the ground. With her left hand gripping the sword, Helena struck the last blow in this battle. Breathing heavily, the young people stood next to each other, trying to come to their senses. Barely breathing, Helena smiled and said that they had won a good victory. A moment later, the girl fainted, falling to the ground, but her faithful companion did not let this happen. 2 weeks after that terrible fight with the knights, their unit was still camped in the middle of the forest. Helena came out of their tent and silently stood next to her friend, who was sitting next to her with his head bowed low. Trying to overcome the oppressive silence, the boy tried to talk about why they did not manage to get help from a priest in time. The girl said that the main thing was that they could not save the thumb on his right hand. Looking up at his friend, Leo wondered how she managed to continue to care for others in such a difficult time. The young man asked her how she was feeling now, and he said that she was much better. Standing next to her friend, Helena felt the breeze swaying the empty right sleeve of her shirt. The boy said that he had heard that a prince was coming to their camp, but Helena was not very interested in this information. Looking at her friend, she asked him if it was true that he was going back home, and quietly said that she also wanted to return to her family. The friends heard a soldier with an injured arm from their unit calling their names. The soldier clearly reported that a senior officer was calling them in immediately. The young people went to the main tent where the headquarters was located, and the chief officer of their unit was present. The soldier got straight to the point, asking whether his subordinates had heard that the prince would soon be arriving at their camp. The friends learned that after the parade, His Highness would give awards to those soldiers who had distinguished themselves in battle. Then the officer said that he wanted to recommend that they both be awarded, and Leo began to thank him. But their boss continued. Only Leo alone should go up on the stage to the prince during the celebrations. When asked by his subordinate why, the officer replied that if a soldier without an arm went to the prince, the morale of the soldiers would suffer. The boy vehemently argued that it was only thanks to Helena that they managed to defeat those knights and that she deserved honor and reward the most. The young man tried to console his girlfriend, saying that if the officer believed she did not deserve the award, he did not need any reward. Looking down, the chief officer said that, of course, the management highly appreciates the merits of each of them. Silently turning around, Helena and her friend left the room where the headquarters of the chief officer was located. The next morning, the bugles announced that His Highness Prince Arnold de Klaus had arrived at the camp. All the soldiers lined up along the red carpet where the prince was entering the dais and bowed their heads in respect to the royal person. In the front ranks were soldiers who had distinguished themselves in heavy battles with the enemy, including Leo and Helena. Leo heard the voice of the game, that he had gained the achievement of meeting the prince and won the favor of Arnold de Klaus and all the nobles who served the royal family. The soldiers listened attentively to the prince's speech, which praised those who had sacrificed themselves for the kingdom of Aston. The Klaus family promised not to forget this devotion. All the soldiers present were promised a decent reward for their brave deeds during the campaign. Leo climbed up on the platform to the prince, who put his sword on his shoulder and said that he was granting the honorary title of knight to Leo Dexter. Standing among the soldiers, Helena watched her comrade fulfill the biggest dream of her life and become a real knight. The very next morning, the friends packed up their belongings and left the military camp on their way home. As usual, the friends walked alongside each other, and Helena said that maybe when they returned home, she would learn to cook, which confused her friend. The girl continued to make plans for the future, saying that she wanted to open a small shop selling light meals and drinks. The guy was amused by this statement of his girlfriend, and he asked laughingly whether she would generously treat her customers to strong drinks more than food. Continuing this cheerful conversation, the young man asked if the owner of the shop would treat him to a free meal. Looking at his friend, who was happily saying that everything in her store would be free for friends, Leo smilingly said that she would quickly go bankrupt. The girl, laughing, said that the money she received as a reward for her service would be enough for 2 or 3 such bankruptcies. And finally, the young people approached their hometown with excitement and anticipation. Standing in front of her parents' house, Helena was excited to see her family. The chief of the Dehorman tribe and his wife ran out of the house to meet her, alarmed by her parents. Hugging their daughter, who had finally returned, and seeing her in such a state, the parents shed bitter tears and could not say a word. So Leo approached the castle and saw Lord Noel walking toward him. For a few seconds, the father and son stood opposite each other, staring at each other intently and saying nothing. Then the father hugged his only son, whom he had been waiting for 8 months to return from the dangerous campaign. Despite the fact that their army was victorious, the young men returned home with the gloom of defeated soldiers. The 2 friends went to the training ground where they always held their competitions, and Helena took the sword in her left hand in thought. Her friend said it would be good to practice with a one-handed sword and shield, and asked his friend if she wanted to try it now, to which the girl sadly smiled and said that she had nothing to hold the shield with. The young man embarrassedly replied that everything would be fair, no privileges for him, they would compete without any shields. The young man was very sad to see his friend, but he tried to keep her in a good and cheerful mood. The friends began an unusual training session with Helena holding the sword now with only one left hand. The girl enthusiastically started doing the exercises, trying to hold the sword tightly in her left hand. Sometimes she even managed to deflect a sword strike from her training opponent. But holding a weapon with my left hand for a long time was unusual and completely uncomfortable. Her comrade, also holding his sword with his left hand, tried to practice simple exercises. Then the young woman tried to attack the opponent, adjusting to the use of the sword with her left hand. Suddenly, without calculating his strength, Leo unintentionally struck quite a blow. His friend almost stopped the blow, but then lowered her sword and head. Concerned about Helena's reaction to this unsuccessful training, the guy began to say soothing words and rushed to her side. The young man hugged his friend and gently comforted her. Bitter tears ran from the girl's eyes from the very beginning of their training battle. She did not say a word. Looking directly into Helena's eyes, the young man said he loved her and proposed marriage. At first, the girl pulled away from him and looked into his face in silence, swallowing bitter tears. Then she turned away, threw the sword she was still holding to the ground, and quickly left the training ground. The young man shouted after her, begging her to give him an answer to the proposal. The young woman kept walking away without saying a word to him. Finally, she stopped and bowed her head down and firmly said that she did not want to do this. The question of why never escaped Leo's lips, who wanted to hear a completely different answer. Already sobbing loudly and unable to hold back her tears, Helena called out to him to look at her carefully. And then, with her head bowed, she quietly said that she didn't want to get married in this condition. She cried non-stop, exclaiming that she did not need his sympathy. She shouted irritably that he had nothing to expect from such a cripple as she had become now. Ignoring these words of despair, the young man hugged his bride tightly. He looked her in the eyes and told her that none of this mattered and that all he needed in his life was her. Holding Helena in his arms, Leo told her that he loved her and kissed her gently. At the same moment, the figure of his beloved began to disappear into thin air, and he heard a voice thanking him for playing the game, raising Helena. Just like last time, shouting out the name of his beloved, Leo realized that he could not complete the task, and the voice was soullessly speaking, summarizing the game. That Dexter Leo's last profession is a noble knight married to Einar Helena. Helena's profession is cook, and she is married to Dexter Leo. The player learned that after getting married, Helena gave birth to 3 children, opened a small tavern, and lived happily with her husband for the rest of her life. The boy thought that he was relieved that this time Helena did not leave the world young, but was happy living with her husband and family. Continuing the usual flight at the end of each stage of the game, the young man was sure that this time he had made Helena happy, and was glad to have taken revenge on her offender Katrina. Hovering over the abyss, the player heard that this time he did not complete the scenario, but received the skill achievement of transferring skills. Thanks to this scenario, the player realized that he did not yet have the strength to make Helena a princess. Then he had a thought that he missed his real parents and his beloved Jae-ha. And once again, Minseo realized that he was sitting on the dirty, cracked slabs against the wall of the house next to his unhappy sister. It was again a small, abandoned alley in the town of Orville. In a barely audible voice, my sister said she was thirsty and hungry. Feeling for the wallet on his belt, the boy put his arm around his sister's shoulders and said that now they could eat. The player remembered very well how this sad scenario ended last time in the game. Supporting the frail body of the weak girl under his elbow, Leo helped her to stand up. The poor girl looked sadly at her older brother and said that they would not be able to find anything to eat because it was already evening. Despite these words, the young man confidently took her hand and led her away from the dirty alley. They went to the market square, where there were many other vendors offering their goods. The bewildered, promiscuous girl in her drag, following her brother, looked around dreamily, marveling at the variety of food on the shelves. 2 beggars stopped when they reached a food shop where the owner had treated them to some scraps last game. At the same moment, a big man with a huge stick in his hands came out onto the porch, clearly intending to drive the beggars away. In a harsh voice, the man ordered them to leave, good and healthy, before he got angry. Taking a few silver coins from his wallet, Leo showed them to the owner, asking if they could get dinner here. Surprised by this turn of events, the host made a friendly face and asked how the guests could pack their dinner more conveniently. When he heard from the beggars that they would like to eat in his restaurant, the big man was not very happy and said that it would cost a little more. When inviting the ragamuffins into the hall, the owner thought that he had no visitors yet. The girl was surprised and very happy when she heard from her brother that he had found some money. The poor girl was screaming loudly and dreamily, asking if they would buy a new house now. Sitting down to the table, Leo thought that his sister did not know how to behave in society and probably did not receive any education. The girl was behaving strangely at the table, throwing herself at the food, and her brother thought he should teach her a little bit about how to behave. Leo also thought that Helena's upbringing and education would require money that he did not yet have. He was thinking that this scenario was difficult from the very beginning, and now he had to do everything to survive, and only then think about how to make a princess out of Helena. The young man was thinking with a sigh that he was very weak and unlikely to be able to protect his sister. Having eaten to their heart's content and finished their sumptuous dinner, the beggars left the shop. The young man stood in the middle of the street, looking around as if remembering something. The sister asked him where they were going to go now, and he replied that they were going home. She said that their shack was in a completely different city, or had her brother forgotten about it. Smiling, Leo patted his little sister on the head and said that he meant a real home. He remembered the lady who had saved them from the shopkeeper's fury the last time they were in this scenario. The boy thought that the person who helped them last time without expecting anything in return could help them this time. The brother and sister stopped and looked around when they heard someone calling out to them. In front of them stood a crowd of teenagers whose appearance clearly indicated that they were beggars. The eldest of the gang said that it was not good of them to eat to their heart's content and not share with others. Leo answered as politely as possible that they did not wish anyone harm and did not do anything wrong. One of the ragtag men shouted that why would some snot-nosed kids argue with them and was ready to jump into a fight. The leader gestured to the bully, ordering him to stop and not to quarrel with strangers. When Leo heard that he and his sister were breaking the rules, he was very surprised that there were any special rules among beggars. A fat boy shouted from behind the other ragtag men that the main rule was that all beggars should live together, and that strangers apparently thought they were better than others. The leader, calming everyone down, said that there was no need to scare the newcomers who had made a mistake, and Leo said that they were going to leave. Addressing the crowd, he asked for help, asking if the boys knew the street that smelled like oil and leather. After arguing with each other, the beggars showed the strangers the right way to the street they were looking for. The young man politely thanked them for their help, but heard the crowd shouting after them not to come back. Taking his sister's hand again, he led her through unfamiliar streets. As he walked forward, the boy wondered why the game had that encounter with the beggars, whether it made any sense. They came to a street where they could smell leather and oil, and through a window the young man saw a lady he knew from the last time. It was clear that the lady was sitting in thought at a counter with tools for making and repairing shoes. The boy thought that the woman was a shoemaker and gathered the courage to knock on the door. The woman was looking at the dirty and frail beggars in front of her with interest. She allowed the poor people to enter the house, saying that they shouldn't be hanging around the entrance. The boy politely greeted her, and the girl hid behind him in embarrassment. The lady moved to the counter with the supplies, asking what the young people would like to buy from her. The owner said that they looked like they needed new shoes, but it was unlikely that they had the money to buy them. She doesn't give out handouts, so they came to the wrong place. The boy replied that they didn't need charity, but asked permission to stay in her shop for a few days. The young man confidently said that he had the money to pay for his accommodation. This request surprised the woman, who did not expect this from these beggars. The landlady said that she did not want to know how the boy had gotten the money, and she was even less interested in taking care of homeless children. The young man asked if the kind lady could give them some water to wash and clean up. The lady finally agreed to the young man's persuasion and ordered them to take water and towels in the next room, telling them to be very careful not to spoil anything. The girl sat down by the water tub and Leo began to wash her face, thinking that this situation reminded him of the last time. The woman was still sitting at the counter listening to the older brother taking care of his little sister. Leo took the girl out of the room and showed her clean face, saying that this is what his little sister really looks like. He asked the hostess once again, pleadingly, if they could stay in her house in the future. The woman was struck by this change in the girl's appearance. She recognized that she was very pretty and asked if she could speak because she had not heard a single word from her lips during the whole time. Turning to Leo, the lady asked if she understood correctly that the boy wanted to leave the baby here because it was hard for him to take care of her alone. Helena was afraid that her older brother was going to leave her and started crying. The young man explained to the woman that it was dangerous for the girl to be alone on the street while he was working, and that her sister just needed a place to wash and sleep. His pleading and tender concern for his little sister made the mistress think. The boy made a good impression, and his little sister was a surprisingly nice girl. As if continuing to think, the woman said that she could help the boy, but then he would help her. The happy young man thanked the woman and said that he would never forget how kind she was to them. The woman took one of the coins Leo had put on the table and said she was taking it as payment and would take more money from him in a little while. The landlady pointed to the pantry and explained that there was food there and they could eat to their heart's content, and water was brought every morning. A grateful Leo happily asked if they could do anything to help the good woman now. Another young man asked how they should address the lady and was told that they should call her Cassia. The boy told me that his name was Leo and his little sister's name was Helena. During the whole conversation, the woman's eyes were very anxious and sad, and she was acting tense. The boy felt as if their mistress was waiting for something, as if something was about to happen. As if to console himself, the young man thought that there was nothing wrong with their landlady being a little strange. After leaving his thoughts, the boy brought a small tub full of warm water to their new room. Then he called his sister into the room, saying that it was time for her to wash. Despite the presence of her brother, the girl quickly threw off her clothes, and the boy barely had time to turn away. He said he would wait outside, but he thought he had to teach the girl how to behave in society quickly. The young man thought that this little girl would become an adult in 2 years, and she was only a year younger than Helena, the warrior from the previous story. The young man heard his younger sister calling him and asked if he could come in. The foolish girl stood there not fully dressed, which upset and angered her brother. Laughing without feeling embarrassed, she said that it was his turn to become clean. Closing his eyes, Leo instructed his sister never to change her clothes so that he could see it. The girl was told by her brother that it was not good to appear unclothed in front of other people, to which she responded with surprise. The boy emphasized that she was now an adult and should wash and change clothes only when no one else was around. Then Leo explained that it was his turn to wash and escorted his sister out of the room. Scratching the back of his head, the boy thought that he would have a lot of trouble raising this Helena. The next morning, the young man set out to find a job. He knocked on every door where he thought he could get a job. The first 2 job rejections did not upset or frighten him at all. In subsequent attempts, he tried to prove to employers that despite his appearance, he was quite strong, but it did not work. The young man assured his potential employers that he would work very hard and tirelessly, but this did not work either. Time after time, being rejected, the boy became more and more discouraged in his abilities. Reflecting on his future actions, the young man recalled how in the scenario about a childhood friendship, he was able to quickly find a job. It was a job in a forge, but in this scenario, he looked very frail and unlikely to be entrusted with heavy work. He was upset that he had no muscles or useful skills for work, and that his current body was useless. He came up with the idea of marrying Helena off to someone from a wealthy family. She has a beautiful appearance that can conquer anyone. But what should he do now? Because his sister will need at least a basic education that only a teacher can give her based on her appearance alone. The young man reasoned that he had the ability to hunt and use a sword, but there was no place near Orville where he could hunt and earn money. And if you become a mercenary using your sword skills, you will have to leave Helena alone for a long time. The day was coming to an end, and the boy was in complete despair because he could not find any work for himself. The streets of the city were already plunging into nighttime darkness when Leo slowly took one of the coins from his pocket and began tossing it. This juggling of the coins seemed to calm the young man down and allow his mind to consider various options for further events. Suddenly, someone called out to him from the darkness, and he stopped, holding a coin in his hand. A scruffily dressed big man came out of the alley and offered to talk to him for a while, smiling predatorily. The young man saw that 2 more of his accomplices were standing behind the thug, cowering. The men surrounded the skinny boy. and one of them asked him, laughing, why he was walking unarmed through the alleys at night. Then the big man with the earring in his ear asked gently if it was the boy who had heard the coins ringing. The thief said that the beggar must have some money and wanted to grab Leo by the hair. At the same moment, the guy who had dodged quite unexpectedly struck the big man with a strong elbow in the stomach. The thief fell to his knees in pain, and his very surprised accomplices rushed to the boy. Leo jumped so high that it looked like he was flying and struck the second attacker. After receiving a strong kick to the temple, the burly man fell to the pavement. The third of the attackers had already realized that their seemingly frail prey was putting up a good fight, so the offender pulled a dagger from his belt and tried to stab the boy. The nimble young man easily dodged the weapon and thought that he had practiced all the time in previous scenarios. He felt that he didn't even need a weapon to defeat these petty thieves. Swinging, and as if testing the strength of his current body, Leo struck his opponent in the chin with his hand. It was so unexpected for the attacker that he did not even have time to use the dagger he was holding in his hand. The next moment, the third attacker also fell to the ground, dropping his dagger. Having dealt with all the attackers, the boy picked up the dagger and looked at it, carefully assessing the quality of the weapon. The big guy with the earring in his ear finally recovered from the blow and rinsed through his teeth that he would never forgive the kid for what happened. Leo's eyes seemed to shine with an evil fire. He recalled all the cases of his past battles and said that it was time to end it all. Coming around the corner of the building, he heard the voice of the game in his head that he had gotten the Storm of Alleys achievement and had become stronger. As he walked on, the boy reasoned that he had gotten 2 daggers and a few copper coins, but he didn't like this kind of work. Hunting bandits would not bring him the desired wealth, the young man reasoned. To make more money, I need to join a gang, he decided as he walked through the hotel door. In the big hall of the hotel, a guy with a bandage over his left eye was sweeping the floor and said they were closing soon. The behavior of the scrawny beggar who put a dagger blade to his throat right on the doorstep was completely unexpected for the janitor. A janitor with an eye patch was frightened and asked the visitor who sent him. Looking at the janitor, Leo thought that he did not look like an ordinary hotel employee. The guy with the blindfold asked the visitor to calm down and talk first, and in the meantime, managed to give a conditional signal unnoticed. Leo recalled a previous scenario when the mercenaries who attacked them in the hotel were also involved in the transportation of illegal goods, i.e., cooperating with gangs. Suddenly, a tall, sturdy man came into the room, responding to a conditional signal, and asked what kind of noise he heard. The janitor with an eye patch said that a small beggar had jumped into the hall and started threatening him out of the blue. The burly man asked what this new way of begging was and ordered them to put away their weapons. Leo threw his recent achievement on the floor and said that in the western alleyway from the market, 3 defeated bandits could be found, then slowly asked if that would be enough to join their gang. At the burly man's incredulous look, the boy said that his words could be easily verified by going into that alley and that he would return tomorrow for an answer. Trying not to make any noise, Leo quietly opened the door, returning to his room where he now lived with his sister. In the darkness, the boy tried to examine his shirt to see if there were any bloodstains on it after the fight. Then he heard his sister's voice asking him why he came home so late. The young man replied that he had been looking for a job all day and was late. The girl sympathized, saying that he must have had a very difficult day. When the young man asked Helena about her day, she lowered her head sadly and said that she just sat in her room. The next morning, when Leo was going out into the city, he decided that he needed to find a mentor for his sister. Walking through the streets of the city, the boy did not even know where to start this search. He decided that he had no choice but to ask the locals where he could find a teacher. The young man was asking various passers-by if they could help him find a teacher for his sister. But time and again, I heard rejections and caught surprised looks from passers-by. In the middle of the street, a man in a funny hat called out to him. The man asked if the young man needed a teacher for his sister because he could help solve this issue for a small fee. The young man replied that a teacher is needed, but there are several requirements. He must be honest, preferably older, and not necessarily have a very high level of education. The man in the hat heard that almost anyone who can work as a teacher would be suitable for this position, but the main requirement was that this person must be a woman. There was such a teacher, a very friendly and educated woman who soon came to the shoemaker's shop. When the teacher held the first lesson with Helena, the boy asked how it went and how the girl behaved. The teacher said that the girl was very nice, and she understood why her brother decided to find a mentor for her and added that she would not tell anyone about her new mentee. Having agreed that the classes would be held twice a week, Leo paid the teacher for a month of tuition and allocated money to buy books. Hearing this conversation with the teacher, Cassia told the boy that he was a very good big brother. The young man replied that he had to leave again and leave the girl under the supervision of the owner. At that time, Helena was idly playing with a book in her room and asked her brother if he had managed to find a job today. In a not-so-confident voice, the young man replied that maybe he had succeeded, time would tell. As soon as darkness descended on the city, Leo went to meet the janitor he had met yesterday. The janitor ordered him to follow him and led him to an unknown building. When Leo entered the room, he saw a hairless man sitting at a desk, writing something with a pen. The janitor, calling the man his boss, reported that he had brought a visitor yesterday. The boss got up from his desk and walked over to the boy. The man was probably 2 heads taller than the frail young man. The giant greeted him kindly and said that he was glad to see the boy, noting that he must be an experienced fighter if he was able to defeat 3 people with such a thin body. Leo, upset, said that he was not such a professional and was told that they would find out. The man ordered the boy to follow him because he wanted to see his dexterity in action. They were walking through the streets of the city, and the boss asked if the guy's main weapon was a dagger and heard that he preferred a 2-handed sword. This surprised the man, and he said that the young man must be a descendant of a knightly family with such and such preferences in weapons. They came to a room that looked more like a warehouse than a home, where 3 young men were resting on the hay. When the young men saw the bald man, they jumped up and bowed low in greeting, and he smiled, saying that he had not come to scold them. Then Leo heard his boss order him to bring 2 wooden training swords, and that one of them had to be 2-handed. The strongest guy of the 3, named Doll, was ordered by the boss to fight the newcomer. Doll said, smiling, that he would see what the new guy could do. Leo stared at his opponent without saying a word. Both young men took wooden swords. Leo took a 2-handed sword, and Doll a 1-handed sword and a shield. Leo reasoned that if he lost the fight now, it was unlikely that he would be released unharmed. Preparing for an interesting spectacle, the bald man sat down on a pile of straw in the corner and told the fighters to fight at full strength and show what they could do. Smiling confidently, Doll said that a 2-handed sword is good for offense, but not very useful for defense. He barely had time to finish his sentence when Leo launched his swift attack. It was clear that the newcomer had no intention of saving his strength and wanted to win right away. Doll deftly repelled the enemy's attacks with his shield. But at some point in his defense, there was a breach that Leo took advantage of at the same second, hitting his opponent in the knees. Doll's legs gave out, and he fell to his knees, with the point of a wooden sword at his neck. Not expecting such an ending, the defeated agreed that he had lost the battle. Without showing any emotion, Leo listened to his boss congratulate him on his victory. Then the young man heard from the gang leader that he was now one of them, and part of a gang called the Corolla. That evening, looking sad, Helena sat in her room and wondered if her brother hadn't come home again today, and what kind of work he had found for himself. The girl remembered the last time she saw her brother with a dagger, and the stains on his shirt seemed to be not from dirt, but from blood. The young woman shared her worries about the fate of her older brother with Cassia, who was having tea. The shopkeeper said that Leo might have become a gangster, but the girl did not understand what that meant. The woman gently explained to her that they were people who fight with swords. When the girl asked whether it was hard to be a gangster, Cassia replied that there was no easy job anywhere. The door of the shop opened, and a teacher stood on the threshold, holding a book in her hands, and greeted the audience gently. With joy, Helena rushed to meet the kind old lady. The teacher would show Helena new books, and ask her if she had completed the homework she had received last time. Why the girl was so sad during the lesson, the kind lady asked. The student was upset, and could not immediately say the question that was bothering her. The young woman was concerned about who bandits were, and heard from her teacher that they were people who stole. Then she heard that they are very bad people who cause pain and misery to other people. The girl thought that her brother went through all this just for her, and that she should help him somehow. The house where Coral's gang was housed did not look different from ordinary houses in the city, but the gang's emblem was painted on the wall near the door. In a spacious room, Leo was sitting at a table with 2 of his new friends, one of whom said that he had heard that the prince of the kingdom of Aston was coming to town. A young man with long hair said that he got this information from a friend who works in the north of the kingdom. Another friend said that it was no wonder that guards patrol the road from the north gate every day. Leo recalled that due to his achievements in the previous scenario, he has the favor of Prince Arnold de Klaus. This will probably be an outstanding event in the game because the legitimate descendants of one kingdom rarely visit another kingdom. Sitting in front of a full mug of beer, Leo asked his friends why the prince was coming to their city. Laughing, a guy with long hair said that maybe Arnold de Klaus wants to marry a princess from their kingdom. Leo took a drink of beer, and the guys continued to gossip that Princess Chloe was very pretty and that each of them would not mind marrying her. Slowly drinking his beer, the player was thinking about whether there would be a battle in this scenario or only in the engagement scenario. The engagement scenario begins in winter. The other 2 begin in summer. If it is the same year, the battle should begin next spring. If all the scenarios are connected, then some Helena and Leo are now in the town of Deimos and others in the castle of Avril. Trying to put all these thoughts together, Leo sat at the table, still holding his empty mug. The day came when Prince Arnold de Klaus solemnly arrived in the city of Orville. A royal descendant in a beautiful dress was riding a horse through the streets of the city. Leo stood among the crowd of citizens and heard some of them enthusiastically praising the young prince. Looking around at the locals who came to greet him, the prince held his gaze for a moment on a skinny boy in the crowd. Leo also looked at His Highness carefully, thinking that he had seen him before. The young man was thinking about when and how the ability to favor the royal family, which he had received last time, would work. Standing among the cheering crowd, the player thought that the prince was just around the corner in Orville, and he could do nothing to fulfill his mission in the game. A week has passed, and it happened that a cart with goods belonging to the Coral Gang was attacked. Thieves from another criminal group committed this daring raid. Leo was near the cart during the attack and bravely rushed to defend the property belonging to his gang. But the attackers saw a skinny, frail boy and thought he would not cause them any trouble. But the thieves were mistaken because this sickly-looking boy overpowered them all. His friends were delighted and promised to buy him a drink. A young man with long hair reminded his friends that the boss had ordered them to be quiet and not to attract attention because the atmosphere around them was very tense. Another boy told him that it didn't matter because the prince had already left anyway. Leo was stunned by this news. While smoking a cigarette, the guys continued to gossip that no one could have thought that Princess Chloe was such a terrible woman. A young man with long hair said that the princess was secretly dating Count Herman's son. That was the princess, his friends said in response. Leo heard that the king himself was in despair over the disgrace that had happened. The boys continued to talk about how the king's daughter, who seemed to be a very decent girl, turned out to be having fun with such a scoundrel. The young man found out that Herman Ferret was a famous swordsman and politician of the kingdom of Velita, and his son Gilbert IV is notorious for being a nasty, vile type. Leo thought about what had happened, trying to put all the facts he had learned together. Laughing, the gang members discussed that the princess had allegedly kissed Gilbert openly in front of the arriving Prince Arnold. Leo smoked a cigarette and thought that the prince had left in a hurry after such a disgrace, and now his kingdom might start a battle. All battles begin this way, the boy thought, and was glad he had the good sense not to enlist. The tension in society that arose after those events even affected gangs in back alleys. Leo managed to overhear that their gang's rivals had gotten a lot of weapons. The guy told his leader about it, and he decided to seize the weapon. The boss immediately ordered all the members of his gang to gather quickly. Coral's gang attacked Bertz's gang that was selling weapons. Recently, the Bertza gang has been doing very well, and the rival Coral gang has held a grudge against them for slave trade and lack of weapons. Corla attacked Bertza, and a brutal fight broke out between members of both gangs. Fighters from Leo's gang managed to break into a rival gang's weapons warehouse. The boss ordered his men to take as many weapons as they could carry and get out. A heavily armed leader of the Bertza gang suddenly jumped into the room. The boss was not expecting this attack. He did not even have a weapon in his hands at the time. Leo jumped out of the ground and did not give the enemy the opportunity to get even with his leader. In a moment, the chieftain of the other gang was defeated, and the player heard that he had a new achievement of 10 bandits. He becomes stronger when he fights with bandits. The boss, who was pleased to have escaped death, sincerely thanked the young man for saving him. The man admitted that at first he was distrustful of the boy when he suddenly appeared in their gang, but now he has no doubts about him. Leo has now become an official member of the gang and received a tattoo of a dog with a rope on his neck. One morning, as Leo was leaving Cassia's shop for the street, he heard someone calling out to him, calling him a petty thief. He looked around and saw a man calling out to him and ordering him to come closer. The surprised young man recognized the man as the leader of Lano's gang and stopped, not knowing what was coming next. In a rather friendly tone, the man said that he knew that Leo was a very close friend of Cassia's, but he didn't care. Then, pointing outside himself to the corner of the house, from behind which a man in a hood peered out, the leader said that the young man should not bring such boys here. Looking back at the stranger in the hood, the boy thought it must be the tail of the Berets gang. Leo asked the man, who told him that he was a close friend of Cassia. The man smiled and said he had to know all about her relationship. The young man turned around to leave and heard after him that Cassia was a very fragile woman, and he should take care of her. The gang leader said that he knew how interested Cassia was in the young man, and that she finally had some motivation in her life. Eventually, after finishing his unhappy speech, the man allowed the boy to go on. Leo opened the door and slowly entered the shoe store. Cassia was standing right in front of the door and seemed to be waiting for him. She greeted him gently, noting that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The boy asked the woman why she called him her closest friend. The lady said that she could not think of anything else for her friend named Obert, and asked where the boy had met him. A woman came very close to the young man and touched his face, saying that she liked people like him. The boy was very frightened by the woman's seductive behavior, especially since the game's voice said that he had gained a new achievement, the favor of Cassia. At that time, Helena came out of her room, exclaiming that her brother had finally come home. Glad to be able to end the awkward conversation with Kasia, Leo ran up to his sister. Helena was very happy that her older brother had finally returned home, and he apologized for his long absence and said that he had brought her something delicious. The brother and sister left the room, and Kasia stood there looking sad and thoughtful. A young man was asking his younger sister about the time she had spent without him and wondering if anything unusual had happened. When asked how she was doing at school, Helena didn't seem very confident and mumbled that she was doing well. The older brother told the girl that even if he could not be home very often, she should still study very hard. When the girl saw a new small scar on her brother's face, she asked him what had happened to him. The young man patted the girl's head and told her that this little thing happened to him while he was working and that she shouldn't worry about it. Looking closely at the tattoo on Leo's arm, his sister quietly asked him if he could quit his dangerous job. He tried to convince the girl that he earned a lot of money from this job, making a cheerful face. Then the young man assured his sister that as soon as their business went better, he would quit this job. Finally, he told the girl to continue to study hard and not to worry about him because he would be back soon. When the boy quickly left the house, Kasia continued to stand at her counter as if trying to work on her shoes. The woman heard Leo talking to his little sister from behind the door of the room. The girl came out of the room and approached Kasia, asking if she was going to work too. Not understanding what the woman was talking about, she said that she had some business to attend to. As if ashamed of her question, the young woman asked if there was a case where she could help. Surprised, Kasia asked why the girl wanted to do this and was told that her brother had a very difficult life and that she blamed herself for it. The woman asked if Leo had asked his sister for help. The girl fervently assured the owner that she did not want to see her older brother suffer because of her and that she wanted to help. The woman said that the girl should just study well as her brother told her to, that this would be her help. Besides, what kind of work can such a fragile girl do? The woman heard that the girl could clean up garbage, but that this work pays so little that the money would not change anything. The girl had something else to say, but she was afraid to say it. Finally, the girl made up her mind and told us her most cherished wish to buy a house. This dream really interested Kasia, who was already a little tired of listening to the girl's chatter. Happy to be listened to, Helena told us that her dream is to live in a big, beautiful house with her brother. As if reflecting on something of her own, Kasia said that most likely this dream was not for Leo's sake, but only because she wanted to. The young woman tried to convince the owner that if she bought the house, her brother would be happy. The woman said that she did not condemn the girl for her intention because she had once helped a person for her own benefit, but it ended very badly. The girl couldn't understand what she was talking about because she was sure that her dream was very beautiful and would definitely not harm anyone. Helena begged her older friend, with whom she had a very good relationship, to help her realize her dream. Finally, Kasia agreed, saying that she would show the girl what she could do. Approaching the chest of clothes, the woman asked if Helena wanted to go with her today. Upon hearing her consent, the woman gave her a cloak with a hood that she had taken out of a chest and ordered her to put it on. They both left the house and walked through the dark streets of the city, unfamiliar to Helena. She had never been to this part of the city and was scared to be here. Some drunken men were walking down that street, calling out to them and shouting obscene words. But Kasia didn't stop for a moment, and supporting her younger friend, she led her further down the red light street. Finally, they stopped at the door of a beautiful house with red lanterns at the entrance. The guard standing at the door of the house asked Kasia who she had brought with her. The woman said that the girl was with her and told her to just open the door for them. After a bit of hesitation, the guard opened the door and invited them to enter the house. They entered a large hall where various men were sitting at tables having dinner and drinks and being entertained by girls in brightly colored clothes. Surprised and frightened, Helena began to guess where they were. Kasia said that there was no need to worry, they had come to the right place. The guard led them to a door leading from the large hall to another room. In the office, a not-so-young man of respectable appearance was sitting at a desk reading some papers. The owner of the office kindly stood up to meet the visitors and said that he welcomed Miss Kasia. But she was unhappy with this greeting and said that she had asked not to be called that. The gentleman agreed, saying that it was just a habit he had. Pointing to the girl in the hood, he asked who she was and what she was doing here. Kasia took the hood off the girl's head, and her beautiful blonde hair fell over her shoulders. The old gentleman was amazed at the beauty of the sad young woman standing before him. Addressing Kasia, he asked if she thought such a beautiful woman could work here. It was clear that the man was thinking and seemed to be at a loss as to what to do in this situation. Finally, slamming his hand on the table, he said that he did not know where Kasia had found the girl, but his answer was no. He explained that the young woman looked too noble to work in such a city, and he could not make such a decision without consulting the owner. Kasia was very angry with the answer, and she exclaimed that if the administrator could not make a decision on his own without the owner, then why was such an employee needed at all? She grabbed the girl by the hand and dragged her to the exit, saying that there were many places nearby where she would be glad to be taken. The administrator asked Kasia to wait and said that he was just thinking about better conditions for such a beauty. The woman said with knowledge that they needed to organize a place for the girl where only very decent visitors would come. Kasia also set one condition, that the girl be paid a year's salary in advance as a fee for the contract. The administrator agreed to this condition and asked if the girl was willing to sign a 10-year contract. He also asked Helena if she was willing to start working tomorrow. Kasia said that her client would not sign a contract for the time being, but would earn as much money as she needed and leave whenever she wanted. Agreeing to all the conditions, the respectable man told Helena not to worry because the work was not very difficult and she would cope with it. After hesitating for a moment, the girl remembered her older brother, who told her to study hard. But she was determined to help her older brother and said she would do whatever she was told. Then, a respectable gentleman came up to Helena and said that his name was Breton Zoer, and he was honored to have such a great employee like her. The girl was embarrassed when this old gentleman kissed her hand with respect. The administrator escorted the visitors to the door and thought that Kasia probably hoped that the girl would not end up as badly as she did. Sitting in his chair, Breton Zoer thought that the owner would be happy with this deal and that if the girl signed a contract, he could get even more money. A month passed and the fight between the two gangs ended. The leaders came to an agreement, and Bertz's gang gave up the slave trade. Coral's gang agreed not to interfere with the arms trade, and Leo became their main fighter. The guy was in a hurry to get home after all this business, and the first person he met when he entered the door was Kasia. The young man was in a good mood and thought that their hostess was a little strange, but still very beautiful. When he finally gives his younger sister in marriage, maybe things will work out well with Kasia too. After saying hello to Kasia, the young man heard his sister calling out to him outside the room. He opened the door to the room and saw his little sister, who was very happy. The girl was just beaming with happiness and hiding something in her hands behind her back. She proudly handed her brother a large box full of coins and told him that she had earned it herself, and now they would be able to buy a house. Leo stood there as if struck by lightning. He lowered his arms, and the chest fell to the floor with a thud. With horror in his eyes and a trembling voice, he asked his sister what she had done. He was furious and yelled at Helena for daring to do something behind his back. The girl didn't seem to see anything wrong with her actions, saying that she had just earned some money. Leo thought that his sister could not have done this on her own. It must have been Cassia who told her to do it. Grabbing the ill-fated chest of money, he threw it on the counter in front of Cassia, shouting furiously at her. He was furious and could hardly contain himself, asking the woman what she had done to his sister. She remained calm and replied that she did not see anything wrong with it. She just showed the kid how to make some extra money. Helena held her brother's hand and didn't understand why he was so angry. He had always been so reserved and kind. Cassia said that she personally sees nothing wrong with making money. Leo could not contain his anger and grabbed the woman by the clothes, shouting in her face why she did not at least ask him before doing this. Cassia was frightened by the behavior of the young man, who shouted that he had entrusted her with his sister and asked her to take care of her. The boy's rage seemed to have no limits, because what he had done had thrown all his plans into disarray. At that time, Helena crouched down and began to pick up the coins that had rolled across the floor. The girl was offended by her brother, for whom she was earning this money. Trying to defend Cassia, she said that she did not force her because she went and worked as hard as she could of her own free will. The young man could not believe that his sister was saying such terrible things. Leo seemed to be numb and only repeated one word for what, while tears ran from his eyes. Helena just couldn't understand why her brother was so angry and why he was crying now. Now she was angry and crying, saying that he did not understand anything and had no right to forbid her anything. The young man could not understand at what point he made a mistake, and everything did not go according to his plan. Sitting on the floor, Helena was sobbing, saying why her brother was saying such bad things to her. She actually believed that she had done nothing wrong, but only helped as much as she could. The girl thought that if her brother was so angry with her, he would probably leave her now, and she immediately ran out the door and ran out of the house. Leo jumped out into the street after the girl and tried to catch up with her. The boy shouted loudly for his sister to wait for him and not run away. But suddenly, someone's strong hand blocked his way and prevented him from catching up with Helena. Obert stood in front of him, blocking his path, and asked why he was yelling so loudly. Not in the mood for a long conversation, Leo pulled out a dagger from his belt and ordered the man to get out of the way. Waving the dagger in front of the surprised Obert's face, Leo told him to back off if he didn't want any trouble. The gang leader was very angry with the boy's behavior. People from Lano's gang were already running down the alley to help their leader. Obert told the young man to drop the dagger immediately, and if it were not for Cassius, he would have killed the insolent man without warning. The young man had no intention of backing down and threateningly demanded that his demand be fulfilled. The enraged Leo seemed to be out of control. Holding his dagger tightly, he rushed into battle. Blinded by his rage, he did not notice how other members of Lano's gang joined the fight. A strong and unexpected blow from behind knocked the young man down. Two strong attackers from Lano's gang held him tightly, pressing his face to the sidewalk. Leo tried his best to escape from the ambush, but the forces were unequal. The boy gritted his teeth and growled that if he had a two-handed sword, he would have killed them all. Obert ordered his henchmen to pick up the bully and lead him away. The boy was dragged to a shoe store, and the leader twisted his arms and pushed him through the open door. Still holding the young man, Obert asked Cassia what happened here. The woman said that the boy was angry because she had taught his younger sister to earn money. The leader asked if it was the girl that Cassia was hiding somewhere here. Obert forcefully pushed the guy to the floor, shouting that if he did something like that again, they would kill the entire Coral gang. Pretending not to understand the meaning of the problem, Cassia asked why the boy was so angry. An angry young man demanded to know where his sister could have run to which I heard the answer that she had probably returned to work, which Cassia herself sees nothing wrong with. An angry Leo approached the woman, asking through his teeth why she hadn't consulted him when she decided to do this to his sister. In response, Cassia shouted that it was really so important that she had found a job for the girl. Leo heard that the woman herself had once had to work this way for her sick father. The woman said she tried her best to save her father, who finally failed to overcome the disease and passed away. Leo said, through gritted teeth, that her sad story had nothing to do with him, only Helena was important to him. Cassia said that if his sister was so important to him, why did he lie to her about his job, that she was very worried about him? Leo could hardly contain himself when he heard that the girl was only working to help her brother and protect him. When asked where his sister was now, he was told that it was too late anyway. Most likely, Cassia said, the girl is signing a 10-year contract right now. Leo could no longer contain his emotions, shouting out what the hell kind of contract was. Rage filled his eyes when he saw Cassia calmly saying that his sister was very beautiful and would be able to earn good money. He rushed to the woman he hated, wanting to take her life immediately. But Cassia's figure was already melting into the air, and the game's voice said that Helena's last profession had already been determined, and he was thanked for playing Raising Helena. Then he heard that Helena de Hierro's last profession was courtesan and she was single, and Leo de Hierro's last profession was tavern manager and he was single. The end of the beggarly brother and sister's purchase of the tavern, they ran together at the end of their lives. They were both killed by knights. Already flying in the abyss, The boy was desperately blaming himself for failing to fulfill the game's mission. But he has no time for regrets. He has to think about the facts. Jarl is the last name of the royal family of the Kingdom of Conrad, meaning that he and his sister are entitled to the throne. So they became outcasts. And then Helena, a courtesan with connections among the nobility, plunged into politics and had a great influence on military events. In this scenario, Hermann Foray, the swordmaster, was afraid of the courtesan's influence and got rid of her, and also contributed to the fact that the Kingdom of Aston lost. Thus, the probability of Leo and Helena's death in the engagement scenario increases. The player hears that he failed to make Helena a princess, but he partially receives her seduction achievement. Restart. A new stage of the game began, and once again, Leo was picking berries with his childhood friend on a green meadow. Helena was very busy picking berries, but she kept sharing news with her friend, telling him about what she had learned from Monk Leslie in class. Leo was still very angry, but he was trying to reorganize his thoughts. His girlfriend was smiling gently at him as she continued to chatter. The boy was looking at her face and trying to tune into the thoughts of Helena from this story. This was the third time the script about a childhood friendship was repeated, the first of which ended in their marriage. The second option ended with Helena being kidnapped by bandits on the way to Nevis. The boy froze, holding the juicy berry between his fingers, and recalled that from the previous scenario, it turned out that both princes of the Oran Kingdom were scoundrels. The young man looked at his friend thoughtfully and wondered what he needed to do to make Helena a princess in this small town. The boy thought that maybe this time he should send it to the capital's church. Then this Helena will be able to become a priest and fulfill her childhood dream. But it is not clear how he will be able to get out of here and fulfill his mission. The young man thought that maybe he needed to go on a journey to find some useful information. The girl, annoyed that her friend was not paying attention to her, spoke to him, pulling at his sleeve. In the evening of the same day, Helena came to the hut where Leo and his father lived and knocked on the door. Through the closed door, Leo called out from the house that he was coming out to her. As she waited at the door, she was visibly nervous because today was the first time she had skipped the classes she had been having in church with Monk Leslie. The young woman thought that her friend had changed a bit lately. Maybe he sensed that she had decided to change her plans for the future. Whether he will advise you not to give up your dream or, on the contrary, will be happy about your decision. She recalled their childhood when she first told her friend that she wanted to become a priest to help people. The young woman recalled that she was completely immersed in her dreams and did not pay attention to Leo's feelings, who was very upset because priests could not marry. Finally, the door of the hut opened and her friend stood smiling on the threshold. The young man asked her if something had happened to her that she suddenly came to see him like that. The girl was puzzled by her friend's appearance and thought he was up to something. But the guy said he was just happy to see her and had no bad intentions. Finally, he asked what urgent matter had brought the young woman to him. After hesitating a bit, Helena finally said that she was going to go mushroom picking. The boy hastily replied that he was ready to go even now. He didn't need to get ready. But his picky friend thought he was still hiding something from her. The boy thought that his girlfriend was very attentive and noticed all the changes in his mood. Helena in this scenario is probably more intelligent and insightful than all the others, and you have to be careful with her. He followed the girl and thought about how he should start a conversation. When Helena heard her friend talking about traveling, she said that she had no money for the trip and did not want to leave her father and mother. He heard from his friend that she would like to live here in the forest with him, and although it was not the first time he heard these words, his heart was pounding like crazy. All this excitement arises because he thought that Helena really liked him. Finally, his friend asked him directly whether he wanted her to become a priestess or to stay here in the town. The boy said hesitantly that it would be good if she stayed home, but he doesn't want her to give up on her dream. Holding his girlfriend's hand and looking into her eyes, the boy thought that their paths would part now. It was already evening when the young people walked out of the forest and into the town, holding hands. A joyfully smiling monk, Leslie, ran toward them, shouting that perhaps everything was destined by fate and that God was blessing Helena. When the girl asked what had happened, the monk said that the priests who had now arrived in their town were ready to take her with them to the capital's cathedral. A high-ranking priestess approached them and said that their town priest and monk had praised the young lady's abilities. At first, the young woman was very excited to be invited to go with the priestess to the capital's church, as it was her longtime dream. But when she looked into her friend's face, she was sad and did not know what to say. She lowered her head and began to say that she would not be able to go with the priestess to the cathedral. But then Leo interrupted the conversation with a confident voice and asked if he could go with them. The surprised monk and the priest heard that although the young man did not have much knowledge about religion, he was ready to study hard and wanted to serve the church. My friend was also surprised by this speech, as she knew that Leo's family considered hunting a sacred mission. Despite the strangeness of such a proposal, the chief priestess looked at the young people carefully and understood everything. The priest said that she understood what was going on and believed that there should be no problems. But her companion, who looked like a knight in a priestly garb, said that this was impossible. The priestess looked at her companion and asked why this young man could not join them. Clearly and sternly pronouncing every word, the man said that this young man believed in a false god. The knight has already seen a similar tattoo on the boy's arm and understands what it means. The young man said that he always thought that this simple tattoo was the same as his father's, Perhaps it was just a hunting tradition. The stern knight said that those who believe in a false god cannot have anything to do with the church, and they can never become a priest in the church. Leo recalled his father's prayer that he offer the heart and head of the prey in the name of Barbatos, and asked him to accept this offering and protect the family. The priestess said that the boy belonged to a different religion, and that nothing could be done about it, but they could not violate the rules of their church. In despair, Helena shouted that then she would not go to the capital's cathedral either. If Leo doesn't go, she'll stay too, she said, ignoring Leslie's words that she shouldn't turn down such a unique offer. The priestess said that they were leaving tomorrow morning and that she would like to wait until the girl had made up her mind, but that was not possible. Hiding a sad smile, the priestess looked at the young people who stood holding hands. The priest believed that the best option would be for young people to decide for themselves what to do and for no one to interfere. She told her companion that the young people should be left alone and allowed to talk. Young people were walking next to each other. None of them knew what to do. The boy could not hold back his tears. Helena comforted him, saying that she would not leave him and would not go anywhere. In despair, Leo told her that she had to go because it was her life's dream. The young woman objected, saying that it was very important for her to stay with him, and that if he had to make such a decision, he would have done the same by staying with her. Helena said that it was important for her to get married, have children, and be with him for the rest of her life. In response to this expressed desire, she heard her friend refuse. Leo turned away from her and walked away, and she shouted after him, asking why. The girl caught up with him, demanding an answer to her question, while the boy wanted to turn it into a joke, saying that it was too early for them to have children. It was so nice for the young man to stand next to his girlfriend, holding hands and looking into her face. Barely audible, the young man said that maybe they should spend that night together. Blushing, the girl lowered her eyes and accepted the offer. This night was theirs alone, and they spent it in an old mill on the outskirts of the town. In the morning, a rather large crowd of townspeople gathered near the priest's carriage as they were about to leave. Time passed quickly, but the visiting priestess was in no hurry to get into the carriage and leave. And then, in the small square near the carriage, Leo and Helena appeared, walking side by side. When the priestess asked her what she had decided, Helena firmly replied that she would go with them. The priestess replied that then they should immediately set off on their way to the cathedral. Hearing a shout asking the girl to wait, she saw her mom and dad running down the street towards her. The father handed his daughter a small bag with money in it. Helena was surprised and at first did not want to take it. But the mother convinced her daughter that she needed the money in case of emergency and that she should take it. When Monk Leslie approached them, he also brought a small wallet with money for the girl and said that it was money from all the parishioners of their church. The girl was touched that so many people made a donation for her and tears came to her eyes. Leo stood aside sadly in thought and did not say a word. The young woman could not contain her feelings and rushed to her lover to hug him one last time before the long journey. In the crowd of townspeople who were seeing off the capital's priests, they heard dissatisfied shouts that the future priestess should not behave like that. The capital's priestess tried to hint to Helena that such behavior was inappropriate in front of everyone. The girl approached the priest, who asked if Helena had said goodbye to everyone and if they could finally leave. The carriage with the capital's priests and Helena was leaving. Leo stood next to the monk Leslie, his head bowed sadly. The young man asked the priest how long his girlfriend's studies in the capital could continue. The monk replied that before receiving the initiation, one needs to study for 4 to 5 years, but Helena is a very smart girl and already knows a lot. Leslie believed that his student would be able to complete her studies in 3 years, while Leo thought that this was also a very long time. One day, while having dinner with his father, the young man heard that his hunting skills had become much better. After drinking the intoxicating drink from the mug, the young man said that he tried to study hard. The strong drink he tasted made him a little dizzy. The father started a conversation that the young man did not expect and asked what his son thought about the god Barbatos. The young man did not know what to say and told his father that the tattoo on his arm did not allow him to go with Helena. The young man said he wanted to become a priest with his girlfriend. It was hard for the old hunter to hear that his son wanted to become a priest, but was not allowed to, saying that tattoos were a symbol of heretics. The young man told his father that he wanted to save up some money and visit Helena. The hunter got up from the table and walked over to the fire, turning away from his son. Finally, the man said that his son should take the prepared jerky to the market tomorrow to sell it. The boy was surprised that his father was letting him do it himself, because they had always done it together. The boy knew that his father did not like to talk much, and realized that the conversation was over when he walked out the door. Still sitting at the table, the young man wondered if his father had understood his intentions correctly. The next morning, walking through the forest with a full sack of jerky, Leo thought that he was very greedy for having collected so much product. Tired, he sat down and decided to rest for a while, but he heard someone calling out to him. A boy with freckles on his face from their town approached him, smiling kindly. It was Hans, who kindly offered the boy a drink of water he had with him. Seeing that Leo was not very happy about this meeting, Hans decided to continue on his way. The player remembered very well what this bastard had done to them in the same scenario the last time. This vile guy treacherously betrayed them and received a lot of money for it. Then Helena was kidnapped and sold as a toy to entertain princes. The boy wondered what made Hans do what he did, maybe because he loved Helena and was jealous that she left with Leo. Finally, throwing his heavy sack behind his back, the young man decided that the reason was not as important as the terrible act itself. In any case, Leo decided that he would get rid of the bastard at the right time. The boy walked fast, and one morning he reached the market square where there was a lively trade in various goods. Leo approached one of the traders and offered his goods. At first, the man looked at the meat very closely and said that there might be some undried pieces. And then, as if doing a great favor, he wanted to take the goods for a very small price, which made the young hunter very angry. Taking his sack of jerky, Leo, dissatisfied with the price, walked further along the market square. The young man did not want to give away good quality goods for the very low price offered by greedy traders. Finally, after walking around the market, he found a trader who took all the dried meat in the bag at a very good price. After finishing his business of selling meat, the young man was walking down the street when he saw Hans waving at him in a friendly manner. Leo, not having a great thirst for socializing, sat down next to the boy with the freckles to listen to what he had to say. When Leo asked Hans whether he had sold his goods, Hans began to mumble something inarticulate and asked him how his trade was going. Leo said that due to the high quality of the jerky his father produces, they are always in great demand. Continuing the conversation, the guy with the freckles invited Leo to go for a walk with him. When asked where they would go, Hans replied with a sly smile that his friend would soon find out. With a sly look, the boy with the freckles confidently told Leo that he would not regret going with him. He was bragging that he knew everything here and would take his friend to a good place. Since Leo had a lot of free time, he agreed to go with a guy he didn't really like from the last time. Following the boy with the freckles, Leo realized that he had led him to the red light district. The young man turned around and said that he was going to leave right away. Hans started to object, saying that they could have fun here because Helena was leaving anyway. With a nasty smile, the bastard said that it was dark in the room and no faces were visible, so Leo could imagine that he was having fun with Helena. A quick movement of his right hand made the impudent man stop his nasty chatter. The vile man was knocked back a few steps by the hard blow. Hence Hans was cursing, not understanding why Leo had reacted to this situation in such a way. Leo, extremely angry, struck again, not allowing the bastard to get up. Before his eyes was the image of Helena, who in the previous scenario had become a courtesan. The young man, furious with rage, shouted that the bastard had no right to desecrate Helena's name. Leo didn't even want to listen to the frightened Hans's stupid apology. A moment later, the bastard was finished, and the game voice said that the player had received the achievement of destroying civilians. The door of the house near which all this happened opened, and a man looked out, asking what the noise was about. The man saw Leo and looked around and realized what had happened. The man began to scream, calling for help, that there was a thief who had taken a man's life. Leo ran as fast as he could away from this ominous place. Hiding from the guards, the boy realized that if he was caught now, he would be immediately executed for such a crime. He ran through the unfamiliar streets of the city, thinking that he had to get out of here as soon as possible. Finally, he ran to the street that led directly to the city gates. The boy pulled the hood of his cloak over his head and walked straight to the guards standing at the gate. The guards with spears, who were standing guard, did not pay any attention to him. Very surprised that no one stopped him or asked him anything, the young man went out through the gate. At the same moment, he heard a loud order behind him to immediately close the gate because a murder had been committed in the city. One of the guards shouted that a guy had just left the city and needed to be stopped. The guards shouted at Leo to go back immediately, but he only accelerated his pace. Night had already fallen when, wandering along the mountain trails, Leo came to an unknown building. Two armed guards stood at the closed gate of the building and chatted about nothing. Listening to the chatter, Leo thought it was probably some bandits and decided to slip past them as quietly as possible. Trying not to make noise, he began to climb the high fence near the building. But when he was jumping down from the fence, he stepped on a branch that cracked loudly. The guards heard the sound and perked up their ears, looking around. Leo hid around the corner of the house and clutched his dagger tightly in his hand when one of the bandits approached him. The guard, who was not expecting the attack, was knocked down by Leo's first punch. When he came around the corner of the building, he saw a second guard holding a cleaver. Leo asked the frightened bandit if there was anyone else in the building, and the bandit asked him how he knew about the place. Leo thought that these bandits were much weaker than the street gangs of thugs, but that was not surprising because their prey were only defenseless residents and travelers. The young man asked the thief, who was begging for mercy, what was in the boxes that were standing near the building. In a humble voice, the bandit replied that there was only food and firewood. But suddenly, grabbing an axe that was lying on the ground, the thief rushed at the young man with it. A petty thief could not have known what a skilled warrior he was facing. After a treacherous attack, the defeated enemy begged the victor for mercy, but did not receive it. After finishing the case, Leo said to himself that you should only trust those who look trustworthy. He was thinking about what to do next. Maybe he should return to Deimos. In this world, science is not very developed, and all the inhabitants rely on the judgment of priests, thanks to whom the nearest towns probably already know about Leo. The boy thought that just leaving the area would be the best choice, but first he would sell the belongings of these bandits to be able to buy a horse. Thinking that by buying a horse, he would be able to go in search of Helena, the boy did not notice how he found himself surrounded by new bandits. The three attackers were heavily armed and determined to get rid of the uninvited guest. But in a moment, Leo was already listening to his new achievement from the game. He is getting stronger fighting bandits and has the achievement of Master of the Mountain Hut. A carriage carrying Helena and her companions was traveling through the forest on a snowy winter road. The girl looked out the window and heard the priestess say that they had finally arrived in Lutetia. The young woman saw that they had arrived at the majestic building of the main cathedral of the Church of the Holy Cross, which governs all the churches of the continent. The priest said that Helena would enter the school on her recommendation and that she would like to visit her from time to time.